Welcome, Wappin' Crew. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high. Get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Sunday, September 12th, Monday, September 13th. For those of you across the pond and beyond, welcome to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I'm so glad you could join us this evening. Some really creepy things have been happening, including the internet going out right after I started and kicked off at 7, so I apologize for the late start, you guys. But if you're listening live right now, you're listening to us on Spreaker.com under We Are Paradox Media. You can also find us live at KPNL Radio, which you can find at kpnl-db.com. If you would like to follow us and subscribe, you can find us on YouTube under We Are Paradox Media. You can also find us on Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Tumblr, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Deezer, Podcast Addict, as well as Podcast Chaser. Trying to get us back online as far as video goes. And we're going to try StreamYard. We've tried Streamlabs OBS, so many different variations to try to go live on YouTube with video, or on Facebook is where I think we're going to do it because that's where we have most of our followers. But hopefully it works. Mr. Morris is in the chat room and he's like, yep, bad goo-goos. Well, what's funny is, so about 5 minutes before kickoff, I go out into the living room to let the dogs in because they cannot be in the backyard when I'm doing my show. They're just too loud. They seem to be quiet back there until I'm doing my show, and then they start barking, and it's just ridiculous. But every time I would go into the living room, the lamp would be flickering, and I'd leave the room and it'd quit flickering, and I'd come back in after using the restroom and washing my hands, and it would flicker again. And then I came back in for some other reason right before we kicked off, and it started flickering again. And Vern's like, look, woman, you need to quit your crazy shit. I don't know. And then we kicked off the show. The internet went out, so hopefully the bad goo-goos will be gone. Hopefully they shall go away. So tonight we are having story time with me, TessaTNT. And the book we're reading from is 50 Strange Stories of the Supernatural, True Accounts of Weird and Otherworldly Happenings. And we're in a new section of the book. It's called Strange Hauntings. Pretty exciting. So this first story is called The Intruder. Buster, Lloyd Jones Llewellyn, to give him his Christian name, was a busy veterinary practitioner near wartime Feltham when the poltergeist made its appearance. For close on 2 years, he showed extraordinary patience with this tedious and sometimes alarming joker before being obliged to take drastic steps. For Buster, be it understood, was no ghost hunter and in no way interested in the occult. Animals were his life, and he had no time or interest for entities. Whoever they were, quadruped, biped, or with no feet at all, and frankly disbelieved in them till the poltergeist came in the midst of a bustling life and started to be very, very tiresome. Even then, he was not easily upset, and reacted to this further addition to his household, which already included 160 dogs, with something like humorous tolerance, if only the poltergeist had shown the same. But it was not only because of the poltergeist that Buster needed a broad sense of humor. Throughout his life, it had been a useful ally. In the first of his 2 delightful books of autobiography, which was The Animals Came in One by One and Come into the World, published by Secker and Warburg, we read of the small boy Llewellyn living after the First World War with his well-to-do parents and sister in a large house at Feltham. Years before his father had come penniless to London from Wales and made a fortune in the dress business, fully intending that in due course his son should follow in his footsteps. But from an early age, Llewellyn had only one passion in life: animals. As a 4-year-old, he would lie restlessly awake at night, agonizing about the safety of the bats that in the darkness often got entangled in the netting surrounding the tennis court. And if it wasn't bats, it was cats that drew his passionate concern. Poor little things, catching their deaths in the rain he could hear beating against the bedroom windows. Sometimes he got so anxious about them that he had to get up, slip out of the house in his pajamas, and shielding himself against the rain under his father's big umbrella, do a kind of sweep of the area, scooping up protesting cats wherever he could find them, then locking them till daylight in an empty gardener's cottage. Animals were more real to him than human beings, so when Florence, the housemaid, offered him a sugar mouse to eat, it was natural to refuse indignantly, and when pressed to retort with devastating logic. "How would you like a sugar mouse to eat, you?" A fist-clenching refusal to eat meat of any kind soon followed. Not chicken, not lamb, not anything that had hopped or capered or been fed by him. He was scolded and sent to his room, but a self-willed father had produced a determined son, and Llewellyn never ate meat again. There was plenty of wildlife around the little town in those days: rabbits, weasels, hedgehogs, stoats, hares, foxes, and Buster got to know all the species, including the smelly goats, kept by the vicar's wife, to the vicar's disenchantment, and the cows that the dairyman taught him to milk. Then one day, his Irish terrier, Paddy, impaled himself on some railings and had to be rushed to the vet's where an operation was performed. Watched uninvited and unobserved by Buster. Thereupon the 5-year-old informed the family of his future plans. When he grew up, he was going to be a veterinary surgeon. This from a child could be treated lightly, or so his father thought, but he was wrong. 2 years later, Buster caught polio and nearly died. His bed was moved to the drawing room where his mother could nurse him more easily, and she agreed to the big French windows being left open at all times so that he could be in touch with his wild friends. The room was always full of animals. His dog slept on the bed, cats prowled and dozed, 2 had kittens in a corner, tortoises steered tank-like across the carpet, ducks, bantams, starlings, thrushes fluttered, strutted, and gazed beady-eyed while Maggot, his tame magpie, lectured him industriously from the bedpost. God's Zoo, his mother called it, and surrounded by this wildlife, devotedly nursed by her, Buster slowly got better while his father, the stern man of action, who had never known illness, watched impatiently from a distance. At 11, he was ready to go to school, where he was able to swim and play tennis, though not other games. In his teens, he went protestingly under paternal orders into the family dress business and worked there for some time, uneasily conscious that his real life had not yet begun, and sooner or later he would have to face his formidable parent to claim his independence. Then he saw an advertisement by a well-known animal society for trainees in animal husbandry and applied, was accepted and told to start training in a month's time. The fatal moment had come. His father took the news with a total refusal to consider anything but his own wishes, said he would not allow such a step, and when Buster persisted, gave his ultimatum. "If you leave your job, you will get out of this house and never come back." For the rest of that week, till the training began, he said not one word to his son. So Buster got out bag and baggage, did his training at Woodford, and for 5 years worked in animal dispensaries all over London, returning home sometimes when his father was out to see his mother and sisters. Socially, he enjoyed the gay life, but his deeper self was always involved with animals, and he found he had a healing touch with them and sometimes the power of intuitive diagnosis, which he took as a great responsibility. So far, he had not had his own practice, but when war came and he was medically rejected from the Royal Veterinarian Corps, he set up his own surgery at Feltham. On the first day of war, his unpredictable father had appeared at his flat unannounced and invited him to return home. There was a reconciliation of a kind, but before long, despite his son's obvious success, the old man, now retired, relapsed into gloomy silence, and though they were living in the same house, did not speak to him for a year and died, still unforgiving. But Buster had no time for brooding. In the whole history of Britain's animal pets, the year 1940 was probably the most disastrous. Amid food shortages, bombings, and the disruption of families, they suddenly became unwanted, impossible to keep, and were brought to Buster by the dozen to be put down, often by owners distracted at the cruel necessity. But what alternative was there? Buster found an alternative. He took the animals himself till the garden and outbuildings at home became overcrowded, and he and his mother had to find another larger place. They moved to a house near Feltham called Climping Din, which had the advantage of a 10-acre garden, and there Buster built kennels and a cattery big enough to house yet more unwanted animals. Apart from 160 dogs, the inhabitants soon included innumerable cats, ducks, chickens, goats, donkeys, ponies, monkeys, and a parrot renamed Polio, of evil reputation, which decided that Buster was a good thing and went everywhere with him on his shoulder. The shoulder, that is, that wasn't occupied by another reformed character, a Javanese monkey called Wanda. Feeding the animals was the greatest problem, but none ever went hungry. Though the diet was inevitably short on meat, the goats provided a private dairy. There was a large, well-stocked kitchen garden. The chickens laid for victory. A lake in the grounds yielded fish, and people for miles around brought their parceled-up kitchen scraps. All the same, running a wartime menagerie amid air raids was an exacting business, and in addition, Buster still held his surgeries like any other vet and was often up all night working with the rescue services to extract terrified, wounded animals from bombed buildings. It was an intensely busy but satisfying life, with problems which Buster well understood, until the poltergeist arrived. Soon after the move to Climping Din, he was crossing the garden one day when a stone flew past his head and landed with a thump on the grass, then another, then another. As he was alone and too far to be reached from the house or garden boundaries, he supposed some youngster was bombarding him from the bushes, and thought no more about it. But when the performance repeated itself day after day, often when he was far from any shrubbery, he became really perplexed, and not because any stone ever hit him. The joker, whoever he was the worst of bad shots, but no human explanation seemed to fit. He knew his staff too well to suspect them of lunatic games, and Wanda the monkey, who might otherwise have been the culprit, was often with him when the stones flew past. So who was responsible? To Buster, this was not an intriguing mystery, but a very practical problem. Sometimes the stones followed him as he returned to the house, smashing the ground, floor windows, and glass was very difficult to come by in wartime England. The stone throwing went on spasmodically for over a year, but there were other, more unpleasant phenomena. The house was very large, and for convenience, Buster and his staff lived in the former servants' quarters, which were reached by some dingy, ill-lit back stairs. These were frequently used, particularly by Buster, and before long he was made forcibly aware of something sinister lurking there. One day, as he was coming down, he felt a pair of hands squeezing his neck, not choking him, but exerting a definite warning pressure. His reaction was one of horror, but he persevered enough grim humor to invite friends to walk down the stairs and watch their reactions. Almost everyone felt the invisible hands and the pressure. When he was on his own, though, Buster avoided the staircase, particularly at night. At this stage, anyone less level-headed and busy might have panicked, but stone throwing and clammy hands could not stop Buster doing his job. If they had, he would have acted soon enough. All the same, he was happy to have company when 5 army officers were billeted in the house, and really delighted to hear one of them was a padre. For something else had now occurred. After going to bed dead tired at night, he would be woken in the early hours by the sound of weird and dismal organ music. His mother in her room would hear it too, and his sister. His dogs, of which several always slept in the room with him, would crouch and quiver in a corner, with hackles raised as though someone were actually present. But there was nothing visible, either in the room or outside in the corridor. The music seemed to come out of thin air. The officers scoffed at this story, the padre loudest of all, and in turn they readily agreed to test it by spending a night in Buster's room, with the result, however, that each morning a different face came pale and pensive to the breakfast table. The padre even insisted on changing back rooms in the middle of the night. The priestly present had no effect on the phenomena, and in fact they extended to include other weird, untraceable noises, pictures dropping from walls, ornaments sweeping off tables, and, on one occasion, peals of girlish laughter with no girl present, when Buster tripped in the garden and sprained his ankle. But now his mother was seriously upset, and it was time to do something. As a Protestant, to his way of thinking had proved ineffective, Buster now consulted a Catholic priest, and this man performed a service of exorcism, reciting prayers, sprinkling holy water, making the sign of the cross. This worked for a short while, then the turbulent spirit shook off its inhibitions and started all over again. Worried more by the window breakages than anything else, Buster then called in the police, who arrived with earnest professionalism, camouflaged their tin helmets with greenery, and concealed themselves about the grounds. Buster was then invited to perform a walk across the lawn, and, closely observed, the man noted stones showering around him, coming not from one direction, but from several at once. Such an event lay outside their experience, and next day they asked for a repeat performance, in which the poltergeist obligingly cooperated. Once more they asked Buster to take his walk, and for the 3rd time stones whistled through the air. Then the policemen conferred and came up with a considered judgment. "Something very strange is happening here, sir, for sure." But they were sorry they could not help, and advised Buster to try the CID. With the CID, the same rigmarole was repeated, and they too were nonplussed. Why not, said these more sophisticated gentlemen, try the Marylebone Spiritualist Association? So in due course 2 women mediums arrived, one being well known as Estelle Roberts, in Buster's eyes, surprisingly ordinary and sensible people. Sorry, I had to cough. What were the phenomena, they wanted to know. He told them, and there was a new one now. Someone invisible kept ringing the doorbells, for a professional man the most aggravating trick of all. The ladies then said they would hold a séance immediately in the room where the organ played, and Buster was persuaded to sit with them. The women prayed in the darkened room, then sat in silence till Estelle Roberts suddenly quoted the first line of a hymn and said it would mean something to Buster. It was his father's favorite. "The day thou gavest, Lord, is ended." The medium then went into a trance and said his father was trying to get in touch. He was very unhappy and wanted to apologize to his son for being so difficult in his lifetime. At first, Buster was reluctant to believe in his father's presence, but the evidence quickly became overwhelming. The medium gave the dates of his father's birth and death. She described his appearance down to a small mole on his cheek. A clue was given about a family Bible which Buster had never looked into, containing between certain pages a record of family births and photographs of his grandmother. The page numbers were given, and Buster was told where to find the key to the drawer containing the Bible. All this was subsequently confirmed. Finally, a shattering experience, his father spoke to him directly through the medium in his own well-remembered voice. He said he was a lost soul, repentant of the past, and asked forgiveness. As for the poltergeist, his words were mysterious but comforting. He said that when Buster had converted an old outbuilding into kennels, some floorboards had been replaced, which was true, and this had disturbed something and given rise to manifestations. But these would now stop, and stop they did. For the remaining years at Climbing Den, all was quiet. The poltergeist was at peace, Estelle Roberts assured him, and to confirm this said he would receive 2 signs. The first would be a lily growing out of water, the second a sign of the cross. Despite all that transpired that day, Buster was doubtful about the signs. But that winter, he saw a lily growing out of the center of the lake, something never seen before, and 2 weeks later, he received the second sign. One night, he heard an imperious ring at the front door. With a sinking feeling it might be the poltergeist, he opened it, and there was no one there. It had been snowing, and a thing unheard of in the wartime blackout, there was a light shining across the porch. Reflecting the light on the smooth, untrodden, snow-covered ground lay a rough little cross made of brass. As soon as he picked it up, the light faded. In his account, Buster almost apologized for what may seem a far-fetched tale, but says that every word is true, and nothing would make him part with the cross, which meant that his poor strange father was at peace at last. But this was not quite the end of the story. Sometime later, with evening guests, Buster was persuaded to play the game of laying cut-out letters round a table and inviting an upturned wine glass on which each person lightly placed a finger to spell out words and answers to questions. The result was dramatic and uncanny. A person came through, gave a French name, and said he had been killed on a convoy to North Russia in 1942. Many details were given of the ship, the battle, the tactics, and every one of them was subsequently confirmed from Admiralty records. Years after this, Buster once more turned to the wine glass with his friends, and had a conversation with a cheerful and vigorous woman named Hilary, who said she had been drowned while swimming in Norfolk in 1954. To the company in general, and Buster in particular, she kept saying that everything is going to be all right, which was pleasant to hear, though rather vague. But a shattering blow was in store for Buster. As a result of the childhood polio, he had been plagued all his life by illness and been in and out of hospitals, though always returning to his work with animals. Now, in 1958, he began to lose the use of his right leg. Then progressively his arms and his lungs became affected. He struggled on, treating animals from a wheelchair, till in 1965 he had to give up his veterinary practice. 5 years later, out of pure curiosity, he tried the wine glass for the third and last time at an evening party, wondering idly what would turn up this time. As it happened, it was his father. He foretold correctly that Buster would be returning to the hospital a day before the doctors, in fact, made that decision, and also a more hazardous prediction in view of his state of health, that he would survive to return home. And when he got back, his father asked him to get in contact again, using the same method. Buster did get home, but preferred not to take up the invitation, and, reading his books, one may guess why. In early life, he had had a tough fight to free himself from his domineering parent and had no wish now to risk further communication. Why should he? He had no need of spiritual advice, however sound, to boost his morale, for in a strangely uplifting way, feel that, despite the ravages of his illness, he was preserved and perhaps even deepened his freedom. He has made a new life for himself. He writes books, he travels, he enjoys the company of many friends, and he has a lot of interesting things to say about faith, which has been the basis of his work with animals. This it is, no doubt, coupled with a fundamental acceptance of his lot, which has turned the coin of suffering to reveal its positive side. Shown beneath the pain and weakness, an indestructible core of personality, and given solid meaning to the message spelt out years ago by the cheerful Hilary. This, at any rate, is the effect of his books on one of his readers. This next story is called Green Devils and White Bones. A doctor's surgery is almost as secret as the confessional, so doctors hear many strange stories from their parents. Here are two such stories taken from doctors' casebooks in the 19th century. They were told to Sir Walter Scott by doctor friends. He does not give their names, and they do not give the names of their patients, as the matter was private and confidential. "It's the Green Devils," said the patient. "I can't get away from them." "What Green Devils?" asked the doctor. "I don't know what or who they are. They're a band of men dressed in green. They dance in my drawing room, a special dance, peculiar steps that I've never seen before. When I go into the room, there they are, dancing their weird ballet among the furniture." "You're drinking too much," said the doctor bluntly. In those days, the Blue Devils was the nickname given to DTs, or delirium tremens, that disease which besets alcoholics and gives them hallucinations. In this case, the coloring differed, but the doctor presumed the case was the same. He had good reason to think so, for his patient was a rich young man leading a wild and desolate life with plenty of wine, women, and song, particularly wine. He owned 2 houses, an elegantly furnished place in town where he was living at the moment, and an old manor house in the country which he neglected because life there was a bore. "Cut out the drink, and you'll cut out the little Green Devils," the doctor advised him. "Go and live in your country house, take things quietly, rest yourself, early to bed and early to rise, moderate diet, and no alcohol." It sounded a gloomy prospect, but the young man was sufficiently frightened by his visions to take advice. He went to the country, and a month later the doctor received a letter from him. It was a sober, grateful letter saying that the cure had worked. He was feeling fit again, and not a green devil in sight. He was so pleased, in fact, with his newfound well-being that he decided to give up town life forever. He would settle down in the country. He sold his townhouse, since he badly needed the money, having wasted so much previously on drink and other extravagances. But he decided to keep the town furniture and have it transferred to his country place. The furniture arrived. Happily he watched the men arrange it in the gallery of the manor house. It looked perfect in the new setting, and he was delighted. He paid the men, sent them away, then stood alone admiring his furnished gallery. And suddenly they were back. Among the familiar articles of furniture, the green figures formed, mistily at first, then taking on definite form and shape. They began to move in that pattern he had seen before, making those strange, intricate steps of some unknown dance. He blinked and stared and willed them away. He'd had nothing to drink for weeks, so it couldn't be that. Far from vanishing, they became even clearer. The Green Devils capered and frisked about, delighted to see the young man again, and expected him to be equally pleased. "Here we all are," they cried in chorus. "Here we all are." His peaceful life shattered by the green haunting, the young man left everything behind him and fled abroad. He never came back, and his doctor never learnt whether the green devils followed him or whether they stayed with the furniture, which was apparently their material anchorage. Maybe they still dance greenly somewhere in some old junk room of Victoriana, or haunt the gallery of a stately home, whose owners have long since been frightened away. The second patient to be haunted by apparitions was a distinguished lawyer. He would have ruined his career if anyone had known the terror in which he was living, and even his doctor couldn't win his confidence until almost the end. He was sent for when the lawyer had collapsed and was staying in bed. His pulse was slow, his appetite poor, and he suffered from fits of depression, but none of this could account for his shattered state. His family was mystified. The doctor questioned his wife and son, but they could think of nothing to account for the patient's condition. There had been no family disasters recently. Everything had been going smoothly. There had to be a secret, and it must be revealed. The doctor determined to get the patient to talk. He sent everyone out of the bedroom and then locked the door so that he and the lawyer would be completely private. His guess was that the man might have committed a crime and was suffering from torments of guilt. "Confession will help you," he told the man. "Come on now, any skeletons in the cupboard?" "How ironically that you would say that. How ironical," murmured the sick man. "All right, I will tell you, although you'll find it hard to believe." He said that 27 months ago, he could in fact remember the exact date, he had begun to see things which others did not see. He had been in perfectly good health and quite content. His practice was prospering, and he was happily married. His first vision was only of a cat, and he thought it was real for a long time. Then it dawned on him that the animal was for his eyes alone. He wondered whether this was something wrong with his eyesight or his mind, and then he felt afraid. Yet it didn't affect his everyday life in any way. He quite liked cats, so he grew accustomed to its mysterious presence. He didn't mention it to anyone for fear of being thought mad. A few months later, the cat disappeared, and a human figure took its place. This was an apparition of a gentleman usher, the type whose job it was to announce guests' names at grand parties. He was elaborately arrayed in court dress, complete with sword, and accompanied the lawyer wherever he went. In his own house or anyone else's, the usher would always walk up the stairs in front of him, as if to announce him to waiting company at the top. The lawyer attended many receptions, and the usher always came to him and mingled with the crowd, but they never saw him. As in the case of the cat, he grew accustomed to the situation, his only anxiety being the necessity of keeping it secret. Clients would hardly trust their cases to a lawyer who claimed a ghost for company. More months passed, and the ghostly usher vanished. The lawyer was vastly relieved. He thought he could now look back on the whole experience as some minor brain disorder from which he had spontaneously recovered. But worse was to come. One day he was walking by himself in Regent's Park. He had a sensation that he was no longer alone. He looked round warily, half expecting to see that either the cat or the usher had returned. Instead, he saw the image of death itself, a skeleton. He started to run, but it came with him, silent, unsubstantial, its white bones gleaming, its skull horribly grinning. It accompanied him down Baker Street, back to his home in Mayfair, and from that moment it never left him. When he walked alone, it walked with him. When he sat down to a meal, it joined him at the table. When he was with his family, the skeleton hovered among them. When he went about his business at the law courts, the skeleton appeared in the corridors and courtrooms. He had tried to carry on as if nothing were the matter, but of course he couldn't. The apparition made him ill. He couldn't eat or sleep, and his nerves were being torn to shreds. The thing had gradually worn him down. "Promise you won't tell my family," he begged the doctor. "I couldn't bear it if they knew. A story like that would spread like wildfire, and their lives wouldn't be worth living. You see, I tell myself over and over again that it can't really be there, and yet it is. It's driving me to my death. It's an emanation from some other world, and will be with me to the last." "Can you see it now?" the doctor asked. "Of course I can. I've told you. It's before my eyes all the time. But it's no use your looking around like that. You won't see anything. No one does except myself." "Tell me whereabouts in the room it is." "At the foot of my bed." There were curtains round his bed. The 2 curtains at the foot were not quite closed. The patient said, "It's standing in the space where the curtains are left open." The doctor looked at the empty space. "There's nothing there. It's a delusion. Let's prove it. I want you to get up and stand in the place where you now see the skeleton." "Oh, no. No, I can't, for God's sake." The man was so distraught at the very idea that the doctor didn't insist. "All right, old man, calm down. I'll go and stand there." He got up from his chair and stood in the space between the half-open curtains. "Right, have a good look," he said. "No skeleton there now, is there? Just your solid old down-to-earth doctor." Yet despite his hearty manner, the doctor felt uneasy standing there. A chill passed through him. He felt the lightest of touches on his shoulder, but he stood his ground and kept a consoling smile on his face. "Well, tell me if you could see it now." "Not entirely," whispered the patient. "How do you mean, not entirely?" "Never mind, I don't want to alarm you." "My dear fellow, you are the one who's alarmed, not me. Just tell me if you can still see it with me standing here." "Not entirely," said the sick man again, "but the skull is peering over your shoulder." Forgetting his bedside manner for a moment, the doctor jumped and looked sharply behind him. He saw nothing, but he still felt oddly cold and moved quickly away. The patient said hopelessly, "You are very kind, but these powers, whatever they are too strong for you. You can't help me. No one can." The doctor tried other methods of getting rid of the ghostly skeleton, but they all failed. The patient still saw the vision in all its macabre clarity. He gradually grew weaker and more ill during the next 2 months and never rose from his bed again. He faded and died. As he drew his last breath, the skeleton, with its static, ruthless grin, hovered near him. It was with him to the last. The doctor kept the dead man's secret. His family never knew about it, and it makes one wonder which of the distinguished lawyers of that period had a skeleton by his side as he conducted his cases, and whether anyone in an ultra-sensitive state of mind ever did see it in some crowded courtroom, and wonder if he himself were going mad. Perhaps many people see more than they ever admit to seeing, unlike the poet, a contemporary of the lawyer, who, when a woman asked him if he believed in ghosts, answered, "No, madam, I have seen too many myself." A Face in the Mirror. To enter the august portals of Who's Who and be enshrined there among the aristocracy of talent may be the ambition of many people, but only one man, so far as I know, has achieved it exclusively as a writer of ghost stories. If we search those pages for the name Elliot O'Donnell, we find a 3-inch column listing over 50 publications, all of them on ghostly themes, but no other claims to fame. But the writer's biographical details show that he came from a solid middle-class background, more likely, one would have thought, to lead him to a conventional occupation. His father was a clergyman with a living near Worcester. He himself was educated at the reputation Clifton College, Dublin, and later married an English doctor's daughter. From his books, we learn that as a young man at the turn of the century, he tried to enter the Royal Irish Constabulary, but was failed on medical grounds. At this point, it seems that something in his personality took over, impelling him to write about ghosts, so that by 1916 he had already written 12 books with such titles as The Unknown Depths, Ghostly Phenomena, and 20 years' experience as a ghost hunter. At the same time, he was struggling to earn a living by other means, as a fruit farmer in Oregon, then as a prep school master in England, then as an actor in an English touring company, but all this finally petered out before his one lasting enthusiasm, which he followed for close on 60 years, dying in 1965. Elliot O'Donnell seemed to feel that some explanation was required for his preoccupation with the occult, and in one of his early books he claimed that he did not hunt ghosts as much as ghosts hunted him. He did recount the experiences of other people, but many of the strange events had happened to himself. He had not sought them, he seemed to attract phenomena, and it was not a happy fate. I am often sorry, he wrote, extremely sorry I was ever brought into contact with the unknown. It has never given me any peace. I feel its presence beside me at all times. I hope that some day, when I am brought face to face with it, I may be able to hit upon some mode of communication and discover something that may be of real service both to myself and to the rest of humanity. If only I could overcome fear. Seen in this light, those 50 books may have been a means of preserving his own sanity, of providing explanations, however tenuous, of the strange phenomenon which bombarded him, whether he welcomed them or not. Several of his own experiences concerned entities assuming sinister, half-human shapes, which came at him in the night with bony fingers outstretched to throttle him, and perhaps it was the relationship between murderer and victim which intrigued him in the outline of this story, told to him as a young man in America. In the early 1900s, the town of Denver, Colorado, like many other settlements in the United States, was at last looking forward to the prospect of steady, uninterrupted progress. It had been stone-built and brick houses, well-paved streets, and municipality and well-organized medical service. It even had a zoological garden, the pride of older citizens who remembered the treeless, arid waste they had come to as children. But law and order was still a plant of tender growth, and not surprisingly, for Denver was only 40 years old, and in that period, self-help had been the watchword of all its citizens. It was the rumor of gold that had attracted the first settlers, and within a year, by mid-1859, no less than 15,000 prospectors, among them some of the most ruffianly characters to be found on two legs, were swarming into Colorado to scrape, squabble, steal, and murder one another in an area bearing alluvial gold, only 2/3 of a mile long and 200 yards wide. For 3 years the hunt went on, while in Denver the squalid cabins hastily set up reverberated nightly to the roars of drunken men and the cries of half-starved women and children. But then the gold ran out. Denver obstinately survived, and some people thought, why not settle here for good? The men decided they needed a bank and a coinage, so a private mint was set up to issue gold pieces. Thirsty for culture, the ladies started an itinerary and historical society. From the north, an enterprising person arrived with a mule train carrying printed equipment, and soon Denver's first ever newspaper, the Rocky Mountain News, appeared. the proprietor and his staff working with pistols and shotguns at the ready to ward off desperadoes who tended to react violently to printed criticism. Denver survived the Civil War unscathed, but then came serious assaults by Red Indian tribes when every road to the town was cut and for a whole year it was under siege. The Indians were defeated, but later the town was destroyed by fire and had to be rebuilt, house by house. All this was with practically no help from outside through the initiative and daring of its own citizens. It is no wonder that a tradition of rugged individualism survived for many years. One of the younger generation who, around 1900, absorbed the full force of this tradition was a girl named Stella Dean, tall, handsome, but over-masculinized. She was fond of thinking over the story, so often told her that she would not have been born at all if one night during the Indian siege her mother had not seized a hatchet and sliced clean through the skull of an Apache prowling round the house. Her mother, not her father. Father had made himself scarce under the bed, so Stella drew the lesson. Women are strong, but men are weak. Then she thought that she would do with her own strength, which was considerable, and here, too, her mother was a help. "Decide what you want," she said, pointing the bread knife at Stella till she almost winced, "and then go straight for your target. That's the way to get on in life. Stake your claim and then work it, and to hell with everyone else." So Stella thought hard and decided she wanted two things: some money to gain a degree of independence, and concurrently a young man named Peter Simpkins, whom she summed up as pliant, good-natured, and not impossibly stupid. Peter, she felt sure, would be happy to see her wear the trousers. Stella went to work in a typing agency in Denver Main Street run by Mrs. Bell, widowed daughter of the embattled newspaper proprietor, where she found that the only other employee was a frail but beautiful young lady named Hester Holt, for whom Mrs. Bell showed a motherly concern. There seemed to be tragedy lurking in Hester's background. Stella discovered she was an orphan living in lodgings, and it was this perhaps which impelled her as compensation to a romanticism which Stella found very tiresome. "Somewhere there's a rainbow," Hester said, her eyes misting with tears, and then would make typing mistakes. Her ignorance of harsh facts of the practical side of life at first amazed, then flattered Stella, who lost no chance of bringing them home to the shuddering Hester, eliciting such responses as, "Oh my, you don't say," and "Stella, what a lot you know." On this basis they got on well enough, yet Hester had a warmth, a capacity for something which Stella could not define, but knew she lacked, and it made her jealous. 3 months passed, and then one morning Hester failed to turn up. "She's indisposed, I dare say," said Mrs. Bell. "Back tomorrow for sure." But next morning there was still no Hester, and at the dinner break Stella was sent round to inquire at her lodgings to find the landlady in great agitation. "I know what you've come about," she said before Stella could open her mouth. "She's not been here for 2 nights, not last night, not the one before. The poor thing, wherever can she be?" She thought it was just possible Hester might have gone to her sister's in Baltimore, but that was a long way, a difficult journey. "However will she manage, all on her own? Anyway, I have the address. I've written. We should hear soon." "Then let us know, please," said Stella, and left. A few days later, the landlady came to see Mrs. Bell. She had received a reply. Hester had not been to her sister's, but the sister made a suggestion. Hester had often written to her about a young man she was very fond of, and he might know something. His name was Peter Simpkins. "Simpkins?" said Mrs. Bell. "Not the son of the building contractor?" "Yes," said the landlady. "Don't tell me you didn't know. Surely everyone knows that Peter and Hester, they've been going together for a couple of months now." "Really? Well, I am glad. I am sure they are made for each other." And in Mrs. Bell's mind rose a picture of the couple, like the suckered chocolate advertisement, surrounded by fluttering lovebirds, beamed on by a conspiratorial son, naive, tender, thoughtful for one another, rather old-fashioned, very touching. That really is good news. I will go and see him. "Hello, Mrs. Bell," said Peter, opening the door for her at his parents' home, and she thought again what a nice voice he had, what a friendly smile. "I'm so pleased that you have come because I wanted to ask you, have you seen Hester lately?" "But that's what I wanted to ask you." Peter had not seen Hester for 3 days, which was very worrying because usually they met every evening when Hester left the office, round a street corner, in fact, out of sight of the building in case Stella Dean should see them. "But why?" said Mrs. Bell. "What have you to fear from her?" "I've got nothing to fear, Mrs. Bell, but I know Stella is a very jealous person, and she's very jealous of Hester, and if she saw us meeting, well, she could give Hester a very bad time, and she would too." "But why should she be jealous?" "Because a few months ago, Stella and I were engaged." Peter had succumbed, as he put it, rather as a general in the field might succumb to superior forces. Stella had cornered him, and one day he had hoisted the white flag and proposed. But then, oh then, what a change, Mrs. Bell. From that moment on, she thought I was her property, and even the good qualities I had seen in her vanished in a wave of possessiveness. She was horrible to my mother. She was even jealous of my men friends. She was trying to wrap me up like a parcel, isolating me more and more. In a very short time, I got so depressed I just had to break off the engagement. "And where was Hester when you last saw her?" "Now that's an extraordinary thing, Mrs. Bell. On the evening that day when Hester was last in your office, I saw her and Stella taking a buggy ride together. I was cycling back from the building site where I work for my father east of town. It's a lonely track, overgrown, dark, not much place for a buggy ride. Stella was driving. But what really astonished me was that they should be together at all. Stella taking Hester for a joyride, it just didn't fit." At this moment, a sinister thought rose in Mrs. Bell's mind. She said nothing to Peter. Back at the office, she questioned Stella and got no change. No, she had not been out with Hester that evening. Yes, she had been engaged to Peter Simpkins, but it was she who had broken it off. "Not man enough for me, I'm afraid, my dear Mrs. Bell. As for Hester, they were on the best of terms, and I feel protective towards her, don't you?" So with still no sign of Hester, Mrs. Bell told the Denver police, who culled a crop of conflicting evidence. An old gentleman thought he had seen Hester enter her lodgings on the night in question. Someone else confirmed Peter's story about the buggy, but could not be sure the passenger was Hester. The buggy owner said he had definitely hired out the vehicle to Stella, whom he knew well by sight, and Stella, questioned again, calmly said yes. She had never denied driving the buggy, but it was not Hester Holt. It was her own mother who was with her. This, when interviewed a day later, Mrs. Dean obligingly confirmed, and the police, too thin on the ground to search for Hester, then put the case on file. A week after this, Mrs. Bell engaged a new typist, Alice Cummings, a farmer's daughter, and with her arrival, strange things began to happen. First, she complained of feeling icy cold when she sat typing next to Stella at the same table, and moved to the opposite side. Then she accused Stella of kicking her under the table as they worked. "Don't be ridiculous," flared Stella. "How can I, when I'm sitting 4 feet away?" "I don't know, but somebody is." Mrs. Bell noticed that Stella looked frightened. Nothing more happened for a few days until one afternoon, when the 3 women were having a tea break, Alice said to Stella, "By the way, who's that beautiful girl I saw following you into the building yesterday?" "What beautiful girl?" said Stella sharply. "I don't know what you're talking about. I saw no one." "But you must have seen her. She was close behind you, practically touching you. I was crossing the hall, making for the stairs, when I saw you both come in. She caught up with you halfway to the elevator, then seemed to turn off to one side. Anyway, I didn't see her again. I suppose she works on the ground floor." "What did this girl look like?" said Mrs. Bell. "Did you see her face?" "Oh, yes," said Alice, and gave a description. "Why, Stella," said Mrs. Bell excitedly, "that's Hester. It must be. Wherever can the dear child have got to? Why doesn't she come up here?" But Stella apparently could not speak. She gave a gasp, and then, suddenly pale, stared in terror at the door. This revived Mrs. Bell's suspicions, and talking alone together later, she and Alice decided to watch Stella carefully, with the possibility of discussing the matter with the police again, but events were taken out of their hands. Next morning, the three women happened to arrive at the office together. Mrs. Bell had a key in her hand and was about to unlock the door when they heard some sound of a typewriter clicking furiously inside. "And who's got into my office? I should like to know." Quickly she unlocked the door, flung it wide open, and the sound stopped abruptly, and she stared into an empty room. The sun was shining on the typist table, and the machines were standing there with provocative stillness. Stella gazed at this scene, transfixed, swayed slightly, and the next moment ran to a chair and collapsed with her head in her hands. That afternoon, she pleaded influenza and went home early. Well, on that note, you guys, we are going to go to our first musical break. On this break, we have Mystique with I Want It All and If I Slip. Then we have Mocha Tea with, Future Plan. And then we also have Mr. Brick Casey with Mr. Selman. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this musical break.
Yeah, okay. I want it all. Even if you're stepping out of bounds, keep ballin'. I want it all. Diamonds and cars, building big yachts, close up the stars, buying the bars, own it is ours. I want it all, big or small, no more of a downfall. I want it all. I want it all. I want it all. I could sign your baseball. Money making it rain fall on a big mall, owning the whole block, driving to the mailbox, cruising in my yacht. I gotta get up out this box. I want it all. I always knew that I would be rich. Don't doubt for a minute. Speaking to existence, hoping and feeling to give away $1 million. Just be chilling in the tallest building. Say hello to the mission and vision with me. Hello. Watch cost about 150 Rolex diamond luxury sitting next to Movado model cockpit before the arrivals. Lamborghini with bass high, I could hear it all. Sit back, sun roof up is the stars. High performance cars, super saloon, exclusive rims spinning hard. Always wanted to build a park, obstacles to enter. A lot more for the kids, recreation centers. I want it all. Red bricks, cream coated, painted marble fountain as I pass, walking the stone path, heated pool, home theater for all of my family. Wanna do it for my city. Can't wait to see the chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. I want it all. Diamonds and cars, building big yachts, close up the stars, buying the bars, own it is ours. I want it all, big or small, no more of a downfall. I want it all. I want it all. I want it all. I could sign your baseball. Money making it rain fall on a big mall, owning the whole block, driving to the mailbox, cruising in my yacht. I gotta get up out this box. I want it all. I'm inside of a dungeon. Life involves repercussions. Convince that consequences leave me boxed up, feeling suction. How could this bad mistake have me thinking ways to escape? Catching the case, wanting it all has been replaced. Look at a cellmate face. I know they can't relate. I know trust in the soul. Heck no, it's to stay safe. Up in the place where my food is cold on my plate. It ain't no breaks. It's a time to concentrate. Watching my back, got stabbed by too many snakes. Who times dragged against the bars is a rude away. Mind race, body cold, hard to embrace. The situation made me think, why did I miss the hate? And common sense of being solved in so many ways. During the problem thoughts, I forgot I want it all. Forgot I had a dream to rule it, forgot to remember that all my fans had a part that I can have it all. I want it all, staring at the walls, walking down the halls, wait for my collect call, supposed to be at a concert hall. Instead, I want it all behind bars, can't reach for a star. It's a fear, I want it all. 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 Diamonds and cars, building big yards, close up the stars, buying the bars, on it is ours. I want it all, big or small, no more of a downfall. I want it all. Diamonds and cars, building big yards, close up the stars, buying the bars, on it is ours. I want it all, big or small, no more of a downfall. I want it all. I want it all, I want it all. I can sign your baseball. Money making it rain fall on a big mama. Owning the whole block, driving to the mailbox. Cruising in my yacht, I gotta get about this bodice. I want it all. Mystique, mystique, mystique.
Hello? I'm trying to call my baby, but it's poor reception on. She ain't picking up. Hello? Hello? Listen, Mr. Operator. I've been up all day and I'm trying to dial my baby's number. See, it only rings straight to the machine. 617. Now I know something must be wrong with this cell phone, 'cause my baby knows she wouldn't hang up on me. Tell me what's going on. I see most of the time phone only ring twice. How you doing, boo? Cool, how's your date? Nice. Now she ain't picking up, plus a text her. Put it to your plane, she's the one that get next to. It's not just the way, it's all day with affection. I'm hoping this detection is poor reception. Straight to the machine, mean it's like clicking my car, get connected quick. I'm saying, hey, Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Why she ain't picking up, yo? I see the phone rings quite a few times before any answer, and I know she's home, well at least till 3. And I know she's home. No, I don't mean to be any bother, operator, but could you just check and connect this call for me? 'Cause I know she's on. I see the first time I call, I'm like, maybe she working. And the second time I call, I'm like, little bit hurting. But the third time I call, I'm like, going berserk. And now half a day gone, can't get her on the horn. Usually in the morning, maybe it's something wrong. I mean, she wouldn't take this long to call back. See, we tight like that, she's supposed to be mine. So could you please try it one more time? Hey, Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Why she ain't picking up, yo? For some reason, it's like she ain't home. Just wanna get my baby on the phone. Now I know that she's there all alone. So can you please hook up my cellular phone? Hey, Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see there's something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Mr. Cellular Phone Man, I see something wrong with my line. I try to dial my baby's number, but get click every time. Why she ain't picking up, yo? Why she ain't picking up, yo?
I got dreams and ambition, I'm ready and I'm willing, I'm meeting this competition. You don't wanna be my dinner. The whole shift changed when the music bang. Love the look on their face. I got dreams and ambition, I'm ready and willing, I'm meeting this competition. You don't what you really thought. And my jab steady dreaming, chasing missions for the fam. Understand I'm flowing lands from the Milwaukee brand. Thought you knew you can't wear my shoes, not do what I do. It's a mob, I don't pick to choose, just stick it to the rules. Keep my beast above and beneath. They know I'm beauty. What you need, I got what you need when it come to it. Who been grinding all winter so the summer extra lit? I've been in and out the booth trying to weigh up my greatness. It ain't no time to play with it, and if I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. I got dreams and ambition, man. If I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. I'm ready and willing, even if I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. I'm eating this competition. If I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. You don't wanna be my dinner.
With great precision, I'm on a mission. Lots of ambition, my transition. The time was ticking, willing and wishing. Just listen, I punch harder than Sonny Liston. They fishing, looking for teeth. It look like Lipton. They tripping. I am the king, whose competition? Collisions, conclusion is I'm in a position, lifted, transcending beyond their comprehension. Time to hang it up, swaggerific, the lynchman. You know how this goes. Just follow the street codes. We make it look easy like we putting in cheat codes. Beauty and the beast is in beast mode. Haters on the sidelines, I tell them to keep score. I go crazy on the beat, tell Spaz to keep it low. You know Mystique, close with a toaster, you won't toast.
And if I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. I got dreams and ambition, man. If I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. I'm ready and willing, even if I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. I'm meeting this competition. If I slip, I'ma bounce right back, cause I was born for this. You don't wanna be my dinner, huh?
Boca T, let's get it. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. How could you love a man who never been loved? How could you show him something he's so used to lust? I know I'm young, but I know I can be the one if he open up his eyes and know I'm the one he can trust. Support and good loving is all a nigga need. All that bullshit niggas give you is a test to see if you'll leave. And if you leave, you are not a strong queen, cause a queen will stay still, pray and be there for her king. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. I love the way he carry himself, I love his swagger. He had me at happily ever after. No fairy tale, this man I really wanna capture. A peek at you, got my heart beating faster. No road runner, but you got my mind racing. Still can call you up and don't know what to say. My friends might say I'm dumb, my friends might say I'm stupid. Then again, why take advice from single women? Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Future plan is to get you, boy. You all that I think about when I get you. I'ma treat you right, keep you close to my heart. Let's create a kingdom and have a Prince Wednesday. Build an empire, a dream I desire. Like Candy Crush on the Monday. Got butterflies feeling funny. Blunt out the blunt, can't get no higher. Like a fiend who needs sexual healing. Boy, bless me with that business. You're my teacher, you got my undivided attention. Boy, would you come my way and answer a simple question?
Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining me tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. So here I am reading stories to you from the Mile High Clubhouse. Things have been going pretty smoothly since earlier. Hopefully, whatever that was isn't going to cause any more issues. Seems like everything's been going good. Hopefully it got out whatever it needed. The flickering of lights and knocking out the internet. So we're going to continue with the story, A Face in the Mirror. So Stella was away for several days, and during that time, the phenomenon ceased entirely. Then one morning, she came back thinner, ill-looking, with a glazed look as though she were ruminating some terrible problem. The day passed without incident until evening, when on leaving the building, Mrs. Bell was intercepted by an agitated Peter Simpkins. "Mrs. Bell, she's come back. Hester's come back. I saw her this morning about 10 o'clock going in through the main door there. I didn't like to follow her and disturb your work, and also, to be honest," Peter gave her an imploring look, "to be honest, I was afraid." "Afraid? Tell me why." "I can't quite explain it. It was a very curious experience. It was Hester, and yet it wasn't. I know it sounds silly, but I have an awful feeling something terrible has happened." Mrs. Bell saw that Peter was very upset. She put an arm around his shoulder, steered him to the cafe, sat him down, ordered 2 cups of coffee, and said, "Peter, it is time I told you something. I'm very afraid that what you saw this morning was not the living Hester, but something else." Then Peter said quietly, "I know what you mean. I think so too. It was Hester's ghost. Oh, Mrs. Bell." And then he was in tears. Mrs. Bell herself was now taken ill, and for a few days had to leave the girls to work together. Later, Alice told the police what happened. On the very first day they were alone, at about 11 in the morning, Alice glanced up from her typewriter to see Stella staring hypnotized at something on the floor. It was a black dispatch case with the initials H.H. Clearly embossed in gold, and on the side facing Alice, it was jumping to and fro, like a child playing hopscotch. She said a few inches in one direction, then back again a few inches in the other. She had not noticed the noise because she was typing, but now she heard a distinct thump each time it landed. She thought at first there was to be some rhythmic vibration in the building, but everything was as steady and solid as usual. Stella was petrified. The movement stopped after a while, and Alice saw Stella dabbing her face, bathed in sweat. Then lunchtime came, and they both got ready to go out, Alice intending to eat separately. She had put on her hat and was moving to the door when she heard a cry of sheer terror behind her. There was a mirror the size of a large picture frame on the wall opposite the door. Alice at that moment was at the slight angle to it so that she could see the reflection of Stella's face as she stood there with her own hat in her hand. But there was something else in that reflection, another face, and Alice's blood froze as she saw it. The face of a beautiful girl staring into the mirror over Stella's right shoulder. The same face that she herself had described some days earlier and Mrs. Bell had identified as Hester Holt's. Alice fled the room, and without her touching it, the door slammed shut behind her. She stood for a moment in awful fear, then, ashamed of her cowardice, tried the door handle. It turned, but push as she might, the door would not open. Alarmed now for Stella, she ran to the elevator and fetched the man in charge. They tried the door again. Again it would not budge. Then, as they were considering what to do, they saw the handle turn and the door swung slightly back on its hinges. In front of the mirror was Stella's body, motionless on the floor. Stella had fainted and was taken home, but she died that same night from natural causes, her mother said. She always had a weak heart. After the funeral, Mrs. Bell came back and rented another office in the same building for her typing agency, where Alice joined her. One day, Peter Simpkins came to see them in a strangely quiet and solemn mood. "Have you seen what I've seen?" he said. "They've come back, both of them this time. I saw them just now, only 5 minutes ago, walking in through the main entrance, just as before, Stella in front and Hester behind. And they both looked ghastly. They were the ones that looked haunted." "Come back?" said Mrs. Bell, horrified. "But why?" "I think because there's a problem between 'em. It's the problem of giving and accepting forgiveness." Then Peter said a strange thing. "I'll talk to Hester about it. I'm sure I can get her to understand." This next story is called The Blue Lady of Verdala. Very roughly, in the middle of Malta is a 725-foot-high tableland. At the northern end of it lies Medina, the medieval walled capital of the castle, which surrendered its supremacy as the seat of government in the middle of the 16th century to Valletta, newly founded by Jean de la Vallée, as the headquarters of the Order of St. John, of which he was then Grand Master. At the foot of the tableland, perhaps 2 miles from Medina, is a small wooded valley called Bruscedo or Busket. Here migrant birds moving backwards and forwards between Africa and Europe made a staying post. They represent practically the only prey for hunters, and it was on this account that the knights and their falcons were attracted to Bruscedo, where ornamental gardens and games enclosures were eventually laid out. It was for this reason, too, that the valet built himself a small hunting lodge and stables just above the valley, and where he developed the pneumonia that killed him. Compared with Medina, Valletta was low-lying. In some parts it was at sea level, and it was therefore, as it is today, an oven in the high summer temperatures. To escape this worldly purgatory, a successor of Valais, Grand Master Hugues Le Banc de Verdale, successor in 1586, commissioned the Maltese architect Girolamo Cassar, who had built most of Valletta for the order, to design a palace not far from Valletta's hunting lodge. He intended to move there permanently during the high summer months instead of spending occasional days at the hunting lodge as Valletta had done. Cassar's Verdale Palace was almost perfect square, 176 feet by 188 feet, and in appearance is not unlike a Norman keep. Solidly built with a turret at each corner, it is surrounded by a dry moat and is complete with torture chamber, not in the dungeons because there are none, and a secret stairway leading from the Grand Master's bedroom down to the moat, by which he might retreat in case of need. It was, in fact, a fortress-like dwelling, so designed to protect its inhabitants against any attack that might be made on it by a Barbary corsair in search of slaves. When the British ousted the French from the islands in 1799 and began an association with the Maltese that was the last for 150 years, various governors used Verdala Palace as their summer residence. One of them was Lord Methuen, who was governor during and in the years immediately following the First World War. Lord Methuen was attracted to Verdala as probably no other governor has been, and like Verdale, he spent the greater part of the summer there each year. There he entertained an almost continuous flow of guests, among whom in the summer of 1918 was a famous pianist, who was giving a number of recitals in the island. The pianist was given a bedroom on the upper floor adjacent to one of the turret rooms. This, like the other three, was approached from the bedroom up a short flight of steps. The room was spacious, and though sparingly furnished, was comfortable, and there was nothing about its atmosphere that had so far caused its occupant any apprehension. It was with considerable surprise, therefore, when one morning, while he was tying his tie before the mirror, he saw himself looking into the face of a beautiful woman. Her black eyes, accentuated by her olive skin, held a pleading expression. Any moment he expected to hear her voice, but when she did not speak, he turned only to discover that he was alone in the room. The image in the mirror had been so clear, so well defined, that he was certain he had not imagined it. After dinner it might be a different matter, he told himself, but in the cold light of morning the mind does not play such tricks. When he returned to tying his tie, he found that his hands were shaking a little. "Idiot," he muttered, "you must have imagined it. A man of your intelligence does not believe in ghosts." With an exclamation of irritation, he pulled off his tie and began to tie it again. But his fingers would not do as he bid them. When he failed yet again, he went over to the bed and sat down, trying to calm himself. Sorry, I have to send this message really quick. It isn't that I'm afraid, he tried to convince himself. It was the unexpectedness of it, but she looked so real too. Of course, one shouldn't be surprised by ghosts in an ancient building that has so much history. There I go again. He stood up and said firmly aloud, "I do not believe in ghosts." Selecting another tie, he willed himself to tie it, but it was still a botched job when he had finished. He decided, with a shrug, that it would have to do, put on his coat, and went down to the hall, where he found most of the other house guests assembled, waiting for the appearance of His Excellency to lead them into breakfast. The governor's ADC was standing near the foot of the staircase and came over to him as soon as he entered. "Is everything all right, sir?" the young man asked. "Thank you, yes. Why? You look as though you've seen a ghost, sir." It was too amusing. The pianist burst out laughing. "Well, as a matter of fact," he confided, "I've just thought I had." The other guests, curious at the pianist's noisy outburst, had fallen silent. One of Lord Methuen's daughters asked, "Where did you see her?" "In my bedroom," he told her without thinking. "But I say, how did you know it was a woman?" "There is only one ghost at Verdala," the young lady replied. "We call her the Blue Lady. I haven't seen her myself yet, but the children have seen her quite often in various parts of the palace. As a matter of fact, I'm surprised that having appeared to you now, she has not done so before. You see, she spent quite a long time in that room." "Surely you don't believe in ghosts, ma'am," the pianist exclaimed. "Certainly I do. It's a matter of vibrations, you know, extrasensory perception. We all have them, but in some they become more highly developed than in others. Those in whom they are developed can see ghosts. They are usually sensitive people, likely to be artistic or in other ways receptive to the forces that surround us all, but which most are too world-bound to appreciate." Lord Methuen had come into the hall and overheard his daughter's last remarks. "My dear, not vibrations and ghosts before breakfast, surely," he smiled. "She needs only the slightest encouragement," he said to the company. "And that I have given her, Your Excellency," said the pianist. "I've just seen the Blue Lady." By Jove, you have. I told my wife, or at least my daughter did, that perhaps it would not be wise to put you in that room. When you say you've seen her, do you mean this morning or last night? Are you a skeptic then, sir? One of the guests asked. Oh, by no means. You must not misconstrue my innocent words. I saw her only minutes ago, the pianist exclaimed. I was at the mirror tying my tie and saw her reflection in the glass peering over my shoulder. It gave me quite a shock because I had not heard anyone come into the room. She looked as though she was going to ask me something, make a plea of some kind, but when she did not speak I turned around, and there was no one in the room. Who is she, do you know? Yes, I've gone into the history, and I will tell you about it over breakfast, said the governor, but tradition insists that I shall mention no names. It is not a very edifying story, and it is best for the reputation of the Order of St. John, and perhaps for the peace of mind of the descendants of the other parties concerned. The Grand Master did not set a good example to his celibate knights. Within a short time of entering the order, he had broken his vow of chastity, but as he was following a long tradition of the order in this respect, his behavior was not checked. Even so, it had been expected that when he was elected Grand Master, he would curb his profligacy as others had done before him. But he did not see things in that light. His natural instincts were still as demanding for a man of his age as they had been overly active when he was a young man, and he could think of no reason why he should devote his latter years to physical frustration, when there were plenty of women only too willing to have the honor of fulfilling his needs and benefit from the largesse which he was always prepared to distribute for services well rendered. On the contrary, he considered that he would have been a fool not to have put to good advantage the influence he could wield in making his choices, which accrued to him as ruler of the island as well as of the order. Perhaps history would not have had to be so circumspect had he exercised discretion and managed his affairs sub rosa. But again, either he considered himself above man's laws and was prepared to flaunt the law of God as laid down by the Holy Church, or he was completely in the grip of his urges and they utterly overwhelmed him. Nor was he right in thinking that every woman would go weak at the knees with desire for him. There were many indeed who surrendered out of sheer fear and considered themselves defiled for the rest of their lives. The 30 pieces of silver he paid them they threw secretly into the sea. Until he saw the Blue Lady, there had been little, if any, emotional involvement with any of his partners. Rarely did any of the women serve him more than 2 or 3 times. But the moment he cast eyes on her, he became madly infatuated with her beauty, and knew that he would never have peace of mind or of body again until he had possessed her. It had happened on the way from the palace to Saint Anton at Attard to Valletta. The pin in the wheel of the carriage had been worked loose by the unevenness of the road, and the coachman and foot were struggling to replace the wheel when the Grand Master and his bodyguard rode up. Ordinarily, the Grand Master would have ridden by unnoticed, but now his attention was at once attracted to the occupants of the carriage, a lady and her maid. The accident had clearly shaken the lady badly, and she was still trembling as the maid tried to comfort her. Immediately, the Grand Master halted his troop and ordered 2 of them to give the coachman and footman assistance with the wheel. While the repair was being completed, the Grand Master rode over to the 2 men to ask if they had been harmed. Both dropped a courtesy when they recognized who he was, and the lady told him that she had been shaken by the suddenness of the accident, but was otherwise unhurt. "I am most grateful, Your Eminent Highness," she said, "for your consideration and for your assistance." It was as she spoke that the Grand Master first realized her beauty. It would be a gross misinterpretation to say that the Grand Master's heart leapt. Nevertheless, it was at that moment that he knew his body would know no peace until it had had its will of her body. Up to now, if he had ever given a moment's thought to the attractiveness of his partners, it had been merely to subscribe to the rake's maxim that all cats are gray in the dark. Probably for the first time in his life, he was stirred by a woman's beauty. By this time, the will was fixed. Before remounting, he held out his hand, and when she responded, bowed over her hand, lightly brushing it with his lips. "Madam," he said, "I should have been breaking one of the great rules of the order had I not had the chivalry to stop when I saw your distress." As he kissed her hand, she had shivered, and the frisson had communicated itself to him. Wrongly, he had interpreted her action of disgust as a thrill of erotic pleasure. "I hope," he said, "that I shall have the honor of meeting you again in less distressing circumstances." She did not reply, but curtsied again, remaining with her head bowed until she heard his horse move away. "And I hope," she told herself, "that I never encounter such a wickedness again." As he rode towards Valletta, the Grand Master's mind was in torment. What had happened to him? Never before had his loins been so stirred by any woman. Was this love, he wondered, and could not decide. On the way, he beckoned the captain of the guard to him. "Who was that lady?" he asked. "I do not know, Highness," the captain of the guard replied. Arrived at the auberge in Valletta, he immediately summoned his secretary and gave instructions that the lady's identity should be discovered without delay. Some hours later, the information was brought to him. She is ... 28 years old, the mother of 3 children, the wife of a prominent merchant, he was told. "It is a pity she is married," he commented. "No matter, no one is to disturb me until I summon you." Alone, he paced up and down the room, his mind concentrated on finding a plan which would allow his passion for the lady to be assuaged. Presently, he called for his secretary. "Bring the merchant to me with all haste," he ordered. When the merchant came before him, the Grand Master treated him with all courtesy, making him sit down and offering him wine. "I have asked you to come," he said, "because I have heard of your reputation as the striker of a good bargain, and am so impressed by it that I would be grateful if you would undertake some urgent private business for me in Naples." "I am flattered by your eminent Highness's attentions," the merchant told him. "If I can be of use, command me. What is the nature of the business, Highness?" The Grand Master explained, concluding, "If you will undertake the mission and carry it out successfully, you may ask for twice the usual commission. What do you say? I will place one of my ships at your disposal." "Agreed," replied the merchant. "When do you want me to leave?" "Tomorrow." The following morning, the Grand Master watched from the barricades as the ship slipped her moorings and sailed out of the Grand Harbor. He then returned to Auberge, where he offered and ordered his secretary to go in person and command the lady to dine with him that evening at the Verdala Palace. He would send a carriage to fetch her. Impatiently, he awaited the secretary's return. The message the man brought momentarily stunned him. "The lady regrets she is unable to obey your Highness's command to dine," he was told. "For what reason?" he asked. "No reason was given, Highness. That was the message as I have repeated it." The Grand Master took a turn or two about the room and presently called the captain of his guard to him and gave him instructions. At dusk, the captain took his troop to the lady's house, where he repeated the Grand Master's command. On receiving a second refusal, he ordered the maid to bring the lady a cloak on pain of a beating. When the maid returned with a blue velvet cloak and hood, he said, "I hope you will not require me to use force." The lady said nothing, but stood with her head erect, her hands clasped, and let him put the cloak about her shoulders and lead her out to the waiting carriage. At Verdala, she maintained her cold composure as she told the Grand Master, "You are a wicked man. My husband will kill you when he returns." "If he returns," said the Grand Master, "that depends on you." "How do you mean?" she asked, suddenly afraid. "Unless you come to me freely and swear a sacred oath to remain silent forever, he will never return. Or if you break your oath at any time, do I need to say more? The servants will take you to your room. I will come to you presently for your decision." Immediately the door was locked on her. She fell to her knees beside the bed and prayed God to forgive her for what she was about to do. She remained on her knees until she heard the Grand Master's footsteps crossing the anteroom. With a little cry, she rose and ran to the window and threw it open. As the Grand Master entered the room, she caught a glimpse of the hem of her cloak as she flew herself out the window. They found her crushed body lifeless in the dry moat. This next story is called The Waterfall. There are two things I'll say for Dudley Barrington. He is neither a bore nor an intellectual snob, which is admirable, for a man of his eminence and attainments might understandably be either or both. But not Barrington. His presence in the smoking room is always welcome, which in itself is a testimony to ease and grace with which he can shrug off the mantle of a master of music. For it must be admitted that the club tends to attract men whose honors have been won on the turf of Twickenham or the sands of North Africa rather than on a podium of the Festival Hall or the Berlin Opera House. We remember Obolenski's try against the All Blacks more readily and with greater relish than Sir Dudley's more recent tour de force with the Philharmonic, and one of the reasons we are so fond of Barrington, though not the only reason by any means, is that he is not only content, but delighted that this should be so. He summed up the matter neatly enough for us many years ago. "Of course I love music. It's an unhappy fellow, surely, who doesn't love the profession he follows. But when I sit in the sunshine at Lord's the score I am interested in are those of Compton and Edric, not Beethoven or Bartók. And I come to the club for conversation and companionship, not for a fault-by-fault remembrance of the horrors of 4 hours' rehearsal of an orchestra apparently smitten by the arthritis of elbows and a pianist laboring under the impression that the emperor was there to be overthrown rather than interpreted. Do join me in a glass of this most excellent Cockburn, and tell me about Harold's performance in the house today. One hears it was quite remarkable, even by his own incomparable standards of sophistry." Yes, a clubman through and through, Sir Dudley Barrington. And we in our own turn are not entirely Philistine. It was wholly natural, for instance, that the conversation last evening should have turned to the subject of music, and several of the men gathered around the great fire in the smoking room had quite intelligent things to say. But eventually, of course, we looked to Barrington for some contribution to the general talk. He had been sitting quite silent, but he was not being supercilious. His occasional smile had registered appreciation of a good remark rather than scorn over a gaffe. It was Penfold, I believe, who finally made the approach direct. "Well, Dudley," said Penfold, "you have a pretty fair idea now of our tastes, from Sibelius to Gilbert and Sullivan. I appreciate that this is rather like asking a man of letters to name his favorite book, but can you tell us, is there any single piece of music, any work or melody that stands in your memory or affections above all others. Barrington leaned back into the depths of his leather armchair, stretched his long, faultlessly tailored legs luxuriantly towards the blazing logs, and spent a reflective moment over the selection and ignition of a cigar. We were content to wait. It was not in Barrington's nature to create silences merely for dramatic effect. When he spoke, his manner was almost apologetic. As a matter of fact, there is such a piece of music, but I fear I can only reply to your question properly with an anecdote. A simple answer would not suffice, for strangely enough, there is no simple answer. The stewards replenished our glasses, we settled in our chairs, saw to our smokes, and listened expectantly. Barrington, as I have said, is not a bore. To tell you about this music, he began, I must ask you to accompany me on a walking tour I made some years ago, 5, I believe it was, yes, 5, in Scandinavia. Such expeditions have for a long time been my answer to the call for reflection and relaxation, sometimes alone, sometimes with well-chosen companion. On this occasion there were 2 of us, for I was being introduced to Norway by young Gerald Brandon, who served there during the war and who knows the country well. A good fellow, Brandon, and a good conversationalist. He had talked to me many times of the incomparable beauty of the Norwegian scenery, and I was happy to accept his suggestions that we visit there together. And so that Easter we set off, boots and rucksacks at the ready, in a journey that to me was an exploration of unknown delights. We walked the southwestern coastline, marching many miles inland along the banks of the great fjords, Hardanger, Lyse, Geringer, and the rest. It was soon obvious that Brandon had in no way exaggerated the splendor of the country. Every bend in the road brought one upon some new scenic delight, glories of nature ranging from gentle charm to wild magnificence, orchards of cherry and apple waving gently in the breeze, vast and craggy glaciers reflected in the deep blue waters of the fjords. After more than a month of such wanderings, as we settled at last into the comfort of the Ernst Hotel in Christiansand, on the south coast, to ease our muscles in deep baths and to await our passage to Harwich, I felt I had enjoyed not only a holiday, but an experience complete in itself, a segment of life that could be neither added to nor improved. And that is how that Easter vacation would have remained in my mind had it not been for a chance encounter on the evening before our planned departure for home. The old gentleman who addressed us as we sipped our postprandial brandy was remarkable only for his charm and courtesy and the fact that he knew my name. 2 circumstances that may perhaps be not wholly unrelated in my recollection of them. Well, into his 80s, I should say, yet clear in the eye and complexion as a youngster, a man of the outdoors unquestionably, and yet with equal certainty a man of culture and breeding. We talked agreeably for half an hour or so, by which time he had become well aware of the nature and purpose of our visit to Norway, and at length he leaned over and said with a strange eagerness, "Now tell me, gentlemen, what did you think of the Sept?" The name, I confessed, meant nothing to me, and for once Brandon, too, was at a loss. Understandably enough, in what is, after all, a foreign country to us, and yet we both felt unreasonably apologetic, almost guilty, as we saw the old gentleman's palpable disappointment, and we urged him with general insistence to tell us what it was that he had missed. The picture he had painted for us was a long and beautiful valley stretching many miles northwest of Christiansand, a valley green and fertile in its lower reaches, but narrowing to steep and rugged grandeur as it climbed inland past the Edge and the blue waters of Byglansford. This in itself was of small significance. Norway, as I have indicated, abounds in beautiful valleys. What made Sept something out of the ordinary, said our companion, was the fact that for countless countries the mountains and lakes had combined to seal off the people of the valley almost completely from contact with the world beyond. Oh my goodness. Excuse me for a second, guys.
It's taking a bath and he's done and he doesn't have clothes.
Okay.
And Dad's going out to the ranch getting Nova.
So your dad's gone? Okay, I'll be out in a minute.
Okay.
Apologies. Alright, so where would we? So, should you decide to visit there, said the old gentleman, and it is a measure of his persuasive charm that already such an unplanned and inconvenient intention was forming silently in our minds. You will see if you look closely that there are 3 entrances to Sept from the south. The first and earliest, the merest trace of a track, climbs over the top of the mountain. The second is a rudimentary, winds its way circuitously around the same mountain. The third, a 20th century tribute to the power of dynamite, blasts its way clear through the mountain and so provides the only route any normal man would follow for any reason short of sheer necessity. It is, in short, only within the last 100 years that any but the hardiest of travelers have journeyed between Sept and the rest of Norway. The people of the valley, continued our companion, have as a result retained their own language, customs, and culture, to all of which they cling tenaciously, simply because it seems natural to them to do so, and not in response to any vulgar inclination to exploit their quaintness for commercial reasons. The language, I fear, may defeat you, for it is not easily intelligible, even to the Norwegian ear, but certain of the more elaborate customs are very pleasing, heavily embroidered with the silver ornamentations for which the craftsmen of the valley are now justly renowned. And for you at least, Sir Dudley, there is a treat in store, for with your permission I shall furnish you with a letter of introduction to one Torleiv Joram, a silversmith in the village of Reistad, who has the reputation of being the finest musician in all of Sept. He will, I am sure, be honored to play for such a distinguished musician as yourself a few traditional airs on the multi-stringed Hardanger fiddle that is favored by the people of the region. I venture without disrespect to doubt whether, even in your wide experience, you have ever heard anything quite like it. Undaunted by the ambiguity of this last remark, went on Barrington with a grin, both Brandon and myself found ourselves without argument beginning to formulate a plan for cancelling our passage to England, accepting the letter of introduction to the musical silversmith, and making the journey to the hidden valley of Sept. It was a decision for which I shall never cease to be thankful. The countryside was as spectacular as any we had seen in our travels, and the silversmith as hospitable and as talented as our new friend had promised. The music of the Hardanger fiddle, though strange to my ear, was both interesting and melodious, and with the musician's permission I recorded several of his songs on the tape recorder that is as basic to my traveling equipment as my boots. Even now I occasionally play it to remind myself of that exact extraordinary journey, sensing our unspoken feeling that the journey in question, although certainly interesting, seemed scarcely to merit the term extraordinary. Barrington stirred in his chair and added with quite emphasis, "But it was not the music of Torleiv Joram of Reistad that I referred to in answer to Penfold's question, nor was it the strange sound of the Hardanger fiddle. What was haunted my memory ever since the expedition to Sept is the music of a vocal trio that I heard following the evening as Brandon and I made our way south towards Christiansand, and thence towards England. I heard it as I lay at twilight in a meadow just a mile or so south of the charming little hamlet of Os. Brandon and I had halted there not because we were tired, but for the best of all reasons. We had found what we considered the ideal place in which to camp for the night. Striding along the highway, we had heard, faintly at first but gradually growing louder, that lovely and most subtle of sounds, the plash and murmur of great volumes of water falling from a height, and suddenly we saw its source. A most beautiful waterfall gushing like a silver fountain from the mountainside many hundreds of feet above us. A misty cataract that bounced and bounded down to the precipice to the rocky stream beneath. Without a word, we unslung our rucksacks, laid down our bedding rolls, and made our way to a cottage nestling almost at the base of the falls. Our business was swiftly transacted. The sturdy farmer, brushing aside our suggestion of payment, assured us we were most welcome to pitch our tent in his pasture. No sooner had we done so than the small son, dispatched from the kitchen by a smiling mother, brought to us a pitcher of ice-cold milk and a steaming cauldron of farical, a mouth-watering mixture of mutton and cabbage, such as used, he assured us, to speed the Vikings on their voyages of conquest. Well fed and hugely content, Brandon and I debated how best to continue the evening and came to different conclusions. He, perhaps having helped himself more liberally than I to the simmering stew, decided upon a walk before bedtime and set off accordingly. I, perhaps having helped myself more liberally than he, wanted nothing more than to lie in the meadow and watch the sinking sun strike fire and diamonds from the tumbling water of the falls. It was as I lay there in the gathering dusk that the music began, and for a moment I wondered if I was dreaming, for the voice, a rich and lusty baritone, seemed to be pouring out from a cliff that towered above me. But no, I was wide awake, and as a second voice, pure and lovely, only a soprano can be, began to respond to the first. I rushed into the tent and fetched my tape recorder and switched it on. The ribbon on which I had captured the music of the silversmith still had half its length to run, enough to give me at least 30 minutes of this concert if happily it should last so long. I listened enthralled as yet another voice rang out above me, but this time from far away, its basso profondo booming the echoing from the surrounding hills. The music was the most moving, the most dramatic that I had ever heard, and I could scarcely believe in my good fortune in having the means to preserve it for all time. My elderly acquaintance in Christensen had spoken with enthusiasm certainly of the distinctive culture of Stedestall Valley, but nothing in his panegyric had led me to expect anything like this. I gave myself over to sheer delight in the singing, content to wait until later to discover the identity of the singers, for already I had decided that I must meet them. Such talent was too rich to be allowed to languish in the obscurity of this remote Norwegian valley. Well, on that note, you guys, we are going to go to our second music break. On this break, we have Miss Mocha T with Future Plan. We also have, actually, that was from our last break. So we have Mr. Brick Casey with Main Thing. We have Mystique featuring Beauty and the Beast with Rampage. We also have Miss Mocha T with My Life. And Mystique featuring Beauty and the Beast again with Time for School. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this musical break.
I like it when you pop it, drop it, swing. Nah, don't stop it, doing that thing. Go, go, girl, keep doing that thing. I just wanna make you my main thing. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Vanilla chocolate flavor, you're the only one that I'm searching for. You the one for me and I can't complain. You sunshine anytime it rain. Not around then I might go insane. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Honey, you're so sweet, I can't ignore. Thinking about you both more and more. Making it pop and drop and swing. I could be the king and you my queen. Yeah, you look good, but you I'm saying. I just wanna make you my main thing. I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Who's them dudes in the back with the black on. True deep, don't sleep or slack on. Come to the money, honey, I'ma get a stack on. Excuse me, ma, can I get my Mac on? To the left, throw it to the right. Do it like you wanna do it to me all night. From the block, kid know how to act hard. Like brick house, women with a fat backyard. In the club with me and my man's killing that. In the back door with me and my man chilling that. I'm on the floor, I'm like, damn, she killing that. It's going down, no cop around, feeling that. I'm fly, I'm a guy that'll get him. Player like me, need two of you with him. Call you a lollipop and I wanna lick you. Number one, my top choice of pick.
Yo, give it to me, mom. Go, go, girl. Nah, don't stop. Oh, no, girl. Break it down for me. Get it gone.
Can you keep it going?
On and on. Now give it to me, mom. Go, go, girl. Nah, don't stop. Oh, no, girl.
Hey, break it down for me.
Get it gone.
Cause you got it going.
On and on. Can't deny that you too fly. Anytime that I look you in the eye, a phenomenon that I can't explain. Like the things you're doing to my brain. You don't only wanna take away my pain. I just wanna make you my main thing.
I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that.
Can't stop thinking about how you move and all the things that I'ma do to you. True, this might be a little bit strange. Don't care if I don't even know your name. That's why I wanna tell you this simple and plain. I just wanna make you my main thing.
I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that. Who's them chicks all thick with the pumps on? Lumps in the front, back with the bumps on. Not a cat hoping that he get his humps on. I'm way beyond with them other chumps on. Sweet enough to eat and he might bite you. Wanna make love to you, I don't wanna fight you. Nobody like you, not a one like you. When you come around, no telling what he might do. Right now in the club, who the dawn? On a man that got it going on later on. I could tell by the dancing, you digging this song. You can tell I've been digging you all night long. And I love to be digging in you all night long. Party right here, hottie all night long. Let's flex it to the coat check, exit to the Lexus, Nexus, triple exit.
Come on, give it to me, mom. Go, go, girl. Nah, don't stop. Oh, no, girl.
Break it down for me.
Get it gone.
Can you keep it going?
On and on. Now give it to me, mom. Go, go, girl. Nah, don't stop. Oh, no, girl.
Hey, break it down for me.
Get it gone.
Cause you got it going.
On and on. I like it when you pop it, drop it, swing. Nah, don't stop it, doing that thing. Go, go, girl, keep doing that thing. I just wanna make you my main thing. You pop it, drop it, swing. Nah, don't stop it, doing that thing. Go, go, girl, keep doing that thing. I just wanna make you my main thing. Vanilla chocolate flavor, you're the only one that I'm searching for. You the one for me and I can't complain. You sunshine anytime it rain. Not around then I might go insane. I just wanna make you my main thing.
I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that.
Honey, you so sweet, I can't ignore. Thinking about you both more and more. Making it pop and drop and swing. I could be the king and you my queen. Yeah, they look good, but you I'm saying. I just wanna make you my main thing.
I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that.
Can't deny that you too fly. Anytime that I look you in the eye, a phenomenon that I can't explain. Like the things you're doing to my brain. You don't only wanna take away my pain. I just wanna make you my main thing.
I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that.
Can't stop thinking about how you move and all the things that I'ma do to you. True, this might be a little bit strange. Don't care if I don't even know your name. That's why I wanna tell you this simple and plain. I just wanna make you my main thing.
I like it when you pop that, drop that. Keep going, baby, now don't you stop that.
Spark so much fire, think I woke up the dragons. I'm the new beast, spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God, made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful, industry don't fit me. Spark so much fire, think I woke up the dragons. I'm a new beast, spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God, made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful, industry don't fit me. You people find your well Play-Doh. Step into us will be so fatal. Spark so much fire. Think I woke up the dragons. I'm a new beast. Spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God. Made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful. Industry don't fit me. Spark so much fire. Think I woke up the dragons. I'm a new beast. Spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God. Made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful. Industry don't fit me.
Hey, it's swag. I done got back in my bag. I done had people laugh. I done seen people pass. I spaz like spaz. The garbage man and they trash. This of course I can't crash. This a race and I'm fast. I pass the fate and put all of it last. Dragon so I clash. I hide it all in the stash. We are diamonds, they are brass. I'm connected with no lag. She a spin 34 bag. That's my wife and I'm glad. Michael Myers with his stab. Ali with his jazz. A scientist in the lab. JJ Watt in his past. The amigos with the dab. This is why I ride. And I got the nag. Spazzy roll the sack with Mystique in the back. Money tall like Shaq. Weapons like Iraq. I am cancer in a pack. The 9/11 attack. We don't know no slag. You can't hold us back. Rock and roll with that.
So much fire. Think I woke up the dragons. I'm a new beast. Spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God. Made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful. Industry don't fit me. Spark so much fire. Think I woke up the dragons. I'm a new beast. Spitting apocalypse for a fantastic. Got the power from God. Made the rest hard to breathe. I'm on the surface, flow so powerful. Industry don't fit me.
Life, the quality or state of being alive, a living organism, and I am. Mocha tea, let's get it. My life, the sugar, honey, iced tea. They wonder why I smile so gracefully, and wonder why I like blue cheese. When I'm lactose, 10 toes, 10 fingers, nigga, 10 hoes. Flow dope, whip it, microwave and stove was broke. Broke days, broke weeks, even broke months. A rich don't have them going crazy. Lettuce and mac and cheese got them going crazy. Irregular, abnormal, and unusual. So unusual, I got shot for being beautiful. You can tell me love, you so gorgeous, but yet got a gun pointing to my forehead. Yo, head break bread, yeah, we gon' feast. Remember the cold nights we had nothing to eat. Southern Belle raising hell area near you. I'm hungry and leaving no proof. My life, my life, my life. It ain't always sunshine in my life. A big puzzle, I'm trying to figure peace ain't right. They thought I wasn't gonna make it, I know they didn't. It's visual, check your vision if you got the issue. A news feed if you got the memo. Breaking news, a new wave coming. Fuck a wave, hurricane, so mocha-licious. I really do this, it's in my blood. Pass it to my kids when I have some. And that's hip-hop.
Do you believe? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You gotta love to time for school.
Do you believe? Are you ready? Get ready. It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You got to love to learn and have fun. It's time for school.
The funniest memory that I could recall is getting up to shopping my pencil as a kid, showing off my new outfit from head to toe. Yo, I love the life of 3 9-year-olds with hyper goals. My mind be blown. Don't get upset when the answer's wrong. Pray for strength and you'll survive to be strong. I am a teacher, it's how I define myself. Help me vibe so well, don't stress, do your best and forget the rest. Mama made sure we pray to God, highly blessed, and I am honored. No weapon formed against us should prosper, don't ever forget. And I bet when you enter into school, you'll feel ultimate, no consequences of your accomplishments. Move away from the negativity, it got you bit. And if you getting in the midst, just take the time and repent. Stay focused, get a pencil, write about the lesson. Raise your righteous hand, find the answer to questions. Can be your main plan, leave a saucy impression. You are your own fan, you got this, is what I recommend. Do you believe? Do you believe? Are you ready? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You gotta love to learn and have fun. It's time for school.
Do you believe? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You got to love to learn and have fun. It's time for school. Back then, I loved school. I was cool. I was putting in my dues. I ain't wanna be no fool. Mama had it poppin', school supplies and shopping. Success was an option. Math had me locked in, but English was my topic. Lunchtime, I had it rocking. Lunch tables was knocking, and we wasn't stopping. In gym, I was good from the 3. Like Stockton, music class, I had everyone stuck. They was watching. We wore the bow straps with retros and the watches. Love life, humble yourself. That's my creed. Think with your mind and heart, you will achieve. Pray on it, give it to God and proceed. Your goals, ambition, and God is all you need. Imagination and will is something we can't teach. Remember Dr. King, he had a whole dream. You can do whatever you want. I believe.
Do you believe? Do you believe? Are you ready? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You gotta love to learn and have fun. It's time for school.
Do you believe? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out your red carpet. You got to love to learn and have fun. It's time for school.
Do you believe? Are you ready? It's time for school. Roll out the red carpet. Yeah, you gotta learn to love to have fun. It's time for school. Roll out the red carpet. Yeah.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining me tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. Tonight is story time with me, TessaTNT, and we've been reading from this book, Strange Stories of the Supernatural, and I will continue reading from the story within this book called The Waterfall. I hope you guys have been enjoying it so far. To continue. Nor was it the singers alone who aroused my unqualified admiration. The composer, too, whoever he might be or have been, was fit to rank with the greatest. Not Verdi, not Mozart, no, not Beethoven himself in his immortal Fidelio had, to my enchanted mind, created finer, more exquisite operatic melody than this. Though the words were foreign to me, I was in no doubt as to the nature of the tale that was being unfolded. This was tragedy, stark and wild. The strong young voice of the baritone rang with pride, that of the soprano with love, and the bass had a power to it that was at once taunting, challenging, and a force and source of fear. Once, after the baritone had given out with an aria that swooped and soared like a call to war, the soprano answered with a song of piteous, unbearable grief, as heart-rending as Sutherland's Mad Sense in Lucia. And always, always there was the sinister, threatening voice of the bass to tell us that this tragedy was a man's making and no mere accident of fate. But at last the mood changed to a strange and eerie blending. The last notes died away, and I sat silent, enraptured as I had never been before and have never been since. I was still sitting there, unmoving, when Brandon returned from his walk, and my fingers trembled as I rewound the tape recorder. "Listen, Brandon," I whispered. "Just listen to this." He did not press me with questions. My tone and my intense excitement must have told him there was reason in my failure to offer any explanation. As the reel reached the point where the singing had started, or as near to that point as I could judge, I stopped the machine, set the switch to play, and watched eagerly for the look of astonishment that must surely cross the face of my friend. Nor was it only surprise that I looked for, but happiness and pure delight as well, for Brandon's love of music is as great as my own. I smiled secretly in anticipation. Hold on one second. I gotta send Kinsey a message really quick. Because I hear dogs barking. It sounds like at a distance. And I don't know if our dogs got out again. Last night after the after party, I let the dogs out and they all ran away. Went out and called them. 2 came back. It was Zoe and Luke. They never generally run away, but they came back. And Herc and Bean were out like all night and then all day until a friend of ours brought them home. Hopefully there are no dogs out. Because, like I said, it sounds far away. The drum revolved, and we listened to the dying notes of the last tune played to us by Torleiv Bjorn on his Hardanger fiddle. Then silence. I waited breathlessly. Still silence. I stirred uneasily, uncomfortably aware of Brandon's gaze, polite but unmistakably and understandably quizzical. But what was this? The silence, I realized, was not absolute. There was the soft whirring of the motor, and behind that, faint but undeniably, one could hear in the distant background the plangent notes of the waterfall. Brandon tactfully held his peace as I stopped the machine, once again rewound it, switched the dial to record, and spoke into it a verse or two of doggerel. "Now listen," I said, rewinding the altering the switch to play. At once came the sound of my own voice reciting the meaningless rhymes on the very strip of tape on which I had attempted to record the voices of the singers. I must have looked distraught. Heaven knows I felt distraught. But Brandon did me the courtesy of not assuming I had taken leave of my senses as I poured out to him the tale of the music I had just listened to with such enjoyment. I concluded by saying with some heat, "Now here is proof that I have not been dreaming, nor if I could create such music I should not be well known as a conductor, but immortal as a composer." And I sang him some snatches of the melodies that had been indelibly imprinted in my mind, noting down the music as I did so on a writing pad. Brandon's response was both gratifying and astute. "Whatever the explanation, there can be no doubt that you heard this music, nor that it is Scandinavian in origin, for although you hit your notes truly, you failed, if you will forgive my saying so, to capture the strange cadences of the original." "No, I am not psychic," he smiled, noting my look of incredulity. "It so happens I am familiar with this style of singing, though not with the songs themselves. It is an ancient folk art deriving from the necessity for vocal communication between men separated by great distances and perhaps by insuperable physical barriers. In the wilder regions of Norway, you will find many men and women who can pitch their voices that they will carry far across a wide valley, ringing from one mountainside to another in a way that would be utterly impossible to even the finest conventionally trained singer. It must be some such voice you heard, perhaps peasants rehearsing for a festival or merely singing for their own enjoyment. But the quality of the voices, Brandon, and above all, the quality of the music. You will allow me, I think, some expertise in this matter, and what I heard, I assure you, was no rustic chorale performed by amateurs. No, Brandon, this was great music, magnificently sung. It had an air, one might almost say, of, I hesitated over the word, of the supernatural. There was a moment of uncomfortable silence as each of us found his mind ranging doubtfully over the mystery that remained unsolved. The unaccountable failure of the sophisticated and perfectly serviceable piece of electronic equipment to reproduce the sounds that had unquestionably been fed into its receiving apparatus. It was I who finally spoke. "Brandon," said I am a man of music, not of mystery. There must be some logical answer to this affair, and I mean to have it. Our farmer friend seems kindly disposed, and the lights are still burning in his cottage. Let us see if he can satisfy our curiosity. And without further ado, we made our way to the farmhouse door. The farmer welcomed us most courteously and made to usher us indoors. But Brandon, in his impatience, blurted out at once the burden of our visit. The change, the reaction, my friends, was unbelievable. A look of sheer terror transformed the face of this sturdy countryman to a pallid, quivering mask, and the cottage door was immediately, almost violently closed fast against us. In response to our astounded knocking, there came only an incoherent babbling pitched dangerously close to hysteria. Such snatches as were intelligible to Brandon told us merely that we must leave at once that same night, and that no power on earth would persuade this man once more to open his door to us. The very least we could do was accede to the man's request. He had been hitherto the very soul of hospitality, and his state of terror was so great there could be no doubt that our continued presence would cause him, and presumably his family, acute distress. We scribbled a brief note of thanks, enclosed some money with the request that it be put to the purchase of some trifle for the youngest who had so cheerfully brought us our supper, and within 20 minutes we had struck camp and once again on the road. By common consent, no mention was made between us of the events of the past few hours, and at the nearest village we took rooms in the wayside hostel and engaged a car for the following morning. Our simple intention was to seek out the old gentleman who we had to thank for the strange adventure that had befallen us. By noon next day, we were once again in the Ernst Hotel, and in response to our inquiries, an obliging page boy volunteered to seek out the old gentleman and invite him to join us over a glass of sherry. He seemed genuinely pleased to see us and quite touchingly grateful that we had disrupted our itinerary to fall in with his suggestion. And when at last I led the conversation gently and without melodrama to the subject uppermost in our minds, there came this face such an expression of wonder and delight as I had seen only in the eyes of little children attending their first performance of Peter Pan. "Sir Dudley," he breathed, almost overcome by emotion, "my dear Sir Dudley, but how fitting that you of all men, you who have yourself brought magic to audiences all over the world, should have been privileged to hear the music of the silent singers of Sept. And to think that I myself should have been instrumental, no pun intended, my dear sir, I do assure you, in bringing this about. You have made me the happiest and proudest man. Come, let us have another glass of sherry, and I shall tell you all the lies behind the extraordinary experience. The waterfall beside which you made your camp is known as Reidsfossen, that is, the Falls of Riard. The centuries ago, that cataract was the scene of a tragedy terrible in its wastefulness and shameful in the wilful malice that inspired it. There lived then in the vicinity of Os a farmer and merchant of substance, a man possessed not only of land and riches, but of an overweening pride and an ungovernable temper. He was also possessed, and more's the pity, of a sweet-natured and singularly beautiful daughter, who, as she approached the flowering of her womanhood, fell deeply in love with a young man of the district, Riard by the name. The sentiment was reciprocated in full, and since Riard was a lad of good birth and infinite promise, there should have been no hindrance to what all the neighborhood regarded as an eminently suitable match. But that was to reckon without the ill-natured caprice of the girl's father. This evil creature, while pretending to be all in favor of the courtship, waited until the very morning of the wedding before proclaiming that before the ceremony could take place, Riard must prove himself a man of courage, and must do so by accepting a challenge devised by his prospective father-in-law. He must climb the mountainside, leading his horse, and he must then ride the animal across the very brink of the great waterfall. Only then may he claim his bride. Now Riard was both brave and proud, and despite the pleading of his betrothed, despite the outraged protests of the elders of the community, he accepted this insane condition. No man, least of all the hated father of the girl he loved, should question his willingness to stake his life for the greatest prize that life itself had to offer. In a strange and unhappy variety of moods, the lovers, the father, and a group of villagers made their way up to the very edge of the falls, and there they stood silent apart from the girl's sobbing as Riard gazed at the broad expanse of rushing, roaring water. And last he turned, quietly embraced his bride-to-be, mounted the trembling thoroughbred, and guided it gently, soothingly into torrent. To the watchers, no less than Riard himself, the hideous journey seemed interminable. Picking each step with infinite care, leaning its flank steeply against the swift-flowing wall of water, the horse edged its nervous way forward, its rider stroking its neck and whispering ceaselessly in its ears, flattened backwards in fear. Once, twice, 3 times, and yet again, the terrified creature stumbled, and only by crushing her anguished fingers into her mouth did the weeping girl hold back the wild cry that might startle the beast still further and send it and its rider plunging to the rocks so far beneath. And then, at last, a vast sigh arose from the onlookers as the horse seemed to gather its muscles like a cold spring and, with one mighty effort, thrust itself out of the foaming water to the safety of the farther bank. Riard, his wedding finery drenched and clinging to him like a beggar's rags, made, nevertheless, a figure of surpassing dignity as he sat, proud and erect as a captain of cavalry, and raised his feathered bonnet in a gesture that was at once a symbol of defiance and a salute. The girl extended her open arm towards him, and the villagers roared their approbation and relief. Even the madman who had decreed the whole grisly charade was moved to sudden admiration. "Riard," he cried, "you are a man indeed. Make your way down the mountain. There your bride shall await you, and may she always think with pride of the way you won her this day." For a long moment Riard gazed at him in silence. Then he spoke. "My bride," he said, "is no longer a gift from you. I claim her as of right, and I claim her now." and slowly, deliberately, he urged his mounts once more into the turbulent water and set out on his return journey across the treacherous parapet of the falls. Step by fearful step, the quivering beast carried Ryward towards the now silent gathering until at last he was within 3 paces of safety, and the girl was moving joyfully to embrace him. And then the horse stumbled, whinnied in a piercing shriek of mortal terror, and was swept with its rider to destruction on the jagged rocks below. For an eternity of horror there was silence, broken only by the rumbling thunder of the falls. And then, with a wild cry of grief and demented the demented girl snatched herself free from her father's restraining hand, ran forward swiftly as the wind, and cast herself into the boiling torrent to disappear, tumbling, tragic scrap of humanity, as she plunged to rejoin her lover. A chill, said Barrington, seemed to have entered the warm drawing-room of the Ernst Hotel. Then the old gentleman leaned back in his chair and said softly, "So now you will understand, Sir Dudley, why only you and not your electronic gadget were able to receive the music of the silent singers. Those voices from the distant past that come to life only very occasionally to tell their story of love and hatred, of tragedy and remorse to those who have the ear to hear them. Only to those, oh yes, only to those. That is why your poor farmer was so terrified. For simple people fear what they cannot comprehend, and to him you were a madman of the type no doubt described to him time and again by his father and grandfather. Wandering lunatics who appear only once in several decades and who claim to hear music where all right-minded people know full well no music exists. But you, Sir Dudley, and I, who have no such claim to fame, but who many years ago, as a mere boy, used to stroll by the fjords of Grieg, we know, do we not, that it does exist." And rising from his chair, the old gentleman thanked us for our company and walked smiling from the room, whistling softly and tunefully a snatch of melody whose notes were roughly scribbled on the writing pad in my rucksack. So the next chapter is known as Spectres of the Sea. The first story is The Haunting of U-Boat 65. Give me a moment, I must blow my nose. Apologies. I have the back to school cold. You know, kids go to school to the petri dish. They share their cooties. The ones sharing their cooties at this moment are our wonderful neighbors down the road. But yeah, so I got tested for COVID, came back negative, thank Gord. But yeah, it's just a terrible, ugly cold. Ghosts are one thing, accidents are another. When a ship has a reputation for both, she is liable to be shunned by men who might otherwise have signed on with her. But in time of war, a seaman has no choice. Whether he likes it or not, he must leave his superstitions behind, even though he fears he may be sailing in a doomed vessel. Such was the case with the crew of U-Boat U-65. She was one of the light submarines launched by the Germans in 1916 to patrol the heavily protected Belgian coastline, thick with mines and nets. Earliest versions of these frail little craft had a surface speed of only 6.5 knots and carried only 2 torpedoes. They floated up and down Belgian waters, dodging British patrols, weaving in and out of sandbanks, edging up to terrorize fishing fleets or sink the occasional Allied ship. They pierced the Dover Barrage and divide the famous Dover Patrol. Little but game were the U-boats. U-65 was new in 1916. Her surface speed was an improvement on that of her elder sisters, 13 knots. She carried a crew of 34, including 3 officers. The trouble was to make her the jinx of the German Navy began while she was still building. A steel girder was being steadily lowered into place. There was a jerk, a shout of warning, and the massive thing slid sideways and fell with a mighty crash. The noise of its fall and the splintering of wood were mingled with fearful screams. It had fallen on 2 workmen. Slowly, with difficulty, their horrified mates raised the heavy mass as far as they could, but it was jammed, and the tackle had broken. They could not lift it clear of 2 victims. One, it was obvious, was beyond help, a broken, bloody pulp. The other, trapped by legs, screamed for an hour as they fought to free him. Soon after they got him out, he died. In the Dark Ages, a blood sacrifice was made to bring good fortune to a new building. It seemed that U-65 had taken her toll of blood and would now be satisfied, but she had only begun. Work was resumed, and for some weeks went on without mishap. Then came a second fatal mishap. The U-65 was almost ready for launching when 3 workmen, putting the finishing touches to equipment in the engine room, were heard coughing and calling for help. When help came, the engine room door was found to be jammed. Inside was a haze of noxious fumes, and on the floor were 3 corpses. An inquiry produced no satisfactory reason for the escape of the fumes, and the submarine was declared seaworthy. Deutschland über alles. The fatherland had a new weapon to hurl against the enemy. The U-65 slid out of her trails. The day was calm, the omens propitious. She had scarcely gotten into the sea before a sharp squall blew up. The sea rose, swamped her deck, and swept one of her ratings overboard. A boat was hastily lowered, but no trace of him was to be seen. Victim number 6 had died by drowning. Then U-65 was put through the diving trials in which a submarine must prove itself. A certain gloom prevailed amongst the crew. It was justified. Sure enough, when the U-boat was submerged, a leak developed in one of her tanks, and the result that submarine and crew were trapped underwater for 12 hours. Once again, death-bringing fumes filled her, perhaps due to seawater in the batteries. It was never proved. When she finally surfaced and the officers and crew were released, they were half stupefied, sick, choking, but alive. Gott sei Dank. For once the jinx had only been joking. The next time was no joke. The submarine's private fiend had dealt out death by crushing, by asphyxiation, and drowning. Now it experimented with explosives, and most successfully. The U-65 made an uneventful maiden patrol, returned to base, and started taking in torpedoes. Without warning or reason, a warhead exploded. A fearful detonation, screams, chaos followed, and 5 dead men lay huddled and twisted on the submarine's deck. Others were badly hurt. The fateful submarine itself, considerably damaged, went out of action for repairs, during which any workman in possession of good luck charms undoubtedly wore them. A cemetery at Wilhelmshaven, the chief German naval station, received the bodies of the dead, including that of the second officer, a man of striking appearance. Once more, fighting fit, U-65 was manned and prepared to sail. It was evening, and her captain and his officers were discussing plans in the wardroom while the crew settled in. Suddenly, the door burst open, and a white-faced rating stood before them, panting and trembling. The captain's head jerked up. His beard bristled with affront. "What's the meaning of this, Schmidt? Do you know better than to enter the wardroom without knocking?" "I beg pardon, Herr Oberleutnant, but the second officer, I've just seen him," gasped Schmidt. The captain's lip curled sarcastically. "Not unlikely, Schmidt, as you're looking at him now." The new second officer, who was indeed sitting at the captain's side, looked in surprise at the seaman. "No, sir," stammered the man. "I mean the late second officer, the one who died in the explosion." The captain banged the table. "You're drunk! Get out! You'll be in trouble for this." But the blue jacket stood his ground. He had seen the dead man, he repeated, strolling up the gangplank. And somebody else had seen him, a man called Peterson. They would both swear to it, and they were stone-cold sober. The captain sighed. "All right, bring Peterson here, and let him tell his own fairy tale." "He won't come, Herr Oberleutnant. He's up on deck, behind the conning tower, shaking like a leaf he is." "Come along, gentlemen. We'd better investigate for ourselves," said the captain, and led the way on deck. There indeed was Peterson, huddled in a corner, in a worse state of fear than his shipmate. Patient questioning produced the information that he had seen the ghost of the dead officer come up the gangplank, stroll along the bows, and stand there, arms folded, looking calmly out to sea. Peterson had rushed in panic to the corner where he was now crouching. When he dared to peer out again, the phantom had gone. The captain was a reasonable man. He knew the symptoms of drunkenness, and neither of these men had them. They had obviously seen something, but what? The captain had never believed in ghosts. He did not intend to start now. In his opinion, someone was either playing a grisly joke or deliberately trying to undermine the crew's morale. He investigated every possibility, questioning everyone who might have had access to U-65, checked on the activities of other members of the crew, but no evidence of trickery came to light, and he was obliged to let the matter rest. If a fake ghost had been produced with malicious intent, the faker must have been thoroughly satisfied, for the experience of the two sailors had infected the crew with panic. Peterson could not face the prospect of sailing on a death boat. 2 days before she was due to sail, he vanished, risking the chance of a deserter's punishment. 2 years had passed since U-65's keel had been laid. In the latter part of 1917, the U-boat menace had slowly been overcome by Allies. Until the summer of that year, the terror under the sea had been destroying British shipping at an alarming rate. In May 1917, out of every 4 vessels that left British shores, 1 had not returned. In April, U-boats had sunk 840,000 tons of British and Allied merchant shipping. But by the autumn, the picture was changing. The Ministry of Shipping had boosted production. The convoy system was working. Germany would have to think hard and quickly if she were to win the war at sea, and would need to throw every vessel she had into fight. So, U-65, which in less needful times might have been written off, was kept in service. On New Year's Day in 1918, she cruised the Helgoland to Zeebrugge, where she spent 10 days. To the immense relief of the crew, nothing outward happened. Or untoward. Nothing untoward happened. They felt that their luck might have changed with the calendar. Then orders came to sail into the Channel in search of merchant and fishing fleets. The evening of 21 January was wild as U-65 ran on the surface. A gale was rising, The sea threatened to wash over the conning tower. It was a night to be down in the stuffy warmth of your cramped quarters if you were not absolutely obliged to be outside, like the starboard lookout keeping his lonely watch. But suddenly, to his amazement, he saw that he was not alone. Below him, on the narrow, plunging deck, bathed in recurrent showers of spray, was the figure of an officer. Cupping his hands, the lookout shouted a warning. "Don't stay there, sir. You'll be washed overboard." The officer looked up, with the face of a dead man who had appeared to Peterson and his mate. It was a frightened lookout who stammered out his tale to the captain, and he came up through the hatch. Looking from the coming tower, the captain was just in time to see a figure. By the time he had blinked and looked again, it had gone. We are not told what eventually happened to the deserter Peterson or to the other sailor who had seen the apparition. But to the captain, the sight he saw on 21 January was a death warning. A few weeks later, while U-65 was moored in a bomb-proof pen in a canal dock of Bruges, he went ashore to pass the evening at the local casino. The air raid siren sounded as he walked through the streets. British planes were approaching. The captain's place was with his ship. He turned to go back, and a shell fragment severed his head from his body. Ew. After this dreadful happening, an official inquiry into the submarine's troubles was held. The investigating officer in charge of it did not transfer the crew wholesale to another vessel as they asked, but some neat paperwork resulted in most of them being drafted, one after the other, to less alarming environments. The German Navy could not afford to have even one boat manned by demoralized men. While the Jinx U-boat lay at Bruges, it was someone's bright idea to have a pastor come aboard and hold a service of exorcism, bidding any devils who might be aboard to leave ship, in the name of God. Nothing more tactless could have been planned. The new crew had heard unpleasant rumors from their predecessors, and at this confirmation that there were devils sailing with them, they became infected with fear. Ghost stories flew about until the captain issued an order that anyone who claimed to see even a vestige of a phantom would be heavily punished. At first account, exits of the events of the next few months. A petty officer who served on U-65 from beginning to end of her career wrote frankly of his experiences and beliefs. U-65 was never a happy ship, he wrote, though we were always fortunate in our officers. There was something in the atmosphere on board which made one uneasy. Perhaps knowing her evil history, we imagined things, but I am convinced myself that she was haunted. One night at sea, I saw an officer standing on deck. He was not one of us. I caught only a glimpse of him, but a shipmate who was nearer swore that he recognized our former second officer walk through ship. He always went into the forward torpedo room, but never came out again. Several of the blue jackets saw the ghost quite often, but others were unable to see it, even when it was pointed out to them standing alone only a few feet away. Our last captain, but one, would never admit the existence of anything supernatural, but once or twice when coming on deck, I observed him to be very agitated and was told by the men that the ghost had been walking on the foredeck. When the captain's attention was drawn to it, he pretended to see nothing and scolded the watch for being a pack of nervous fools. But afterwards I heard from a mess steward at the officers' casino that our captain openly declared his ship to be haunted by devils. During May, when on the Storyteller, the U-boat was cruising up and down the channel and off Spain. It was a terrible trip. After 2 days at sea, a torpedo gunner named Eberhard went screaming mad and had to be tied hand and foot, giving morphia to quiet him. The treatment seemed to take effect, and he was released and sent on deck for air in the company of another of the crew. No sooner did he reach the deck that he again went berserk. Pushing away the man at his side, he leapt over the rail and went down like a stone. His body was never recovered. Off Ushant, when high seas were raging, the chief engineer slipped and broke a leg. The submarine was hopefully chasing a British tramp steamer, firing with her deck gun when waves towered over the gun crew and washed one of them, Richard Meyer, overboard. He, too, was never seen again. Now the submarine, again to avoid encounters with British or Allied boats that would otherwise have seemed her natural prey, for each one might be the instrument of the final fate that her entire crew were sure was in store for her. The men were so depressed that they went about like sleepwalkers, performing their duties automatically and starting at every unusual sound. They were not reassured to find themselves approaching the dreaded Straits of Dover, where 3 U-boats, U-55, U-33, and U-79, had just been blown up. Their fears were justified. They were shot at on the surface, depth-charged when submerged, and coxswain Lohman received injuries from which he died. A battered U-65 limped away to Zeebrugge, almost sorry to have escaped. Most of us felt that it was merely prolonging the agony. At this point, the storyteller, to his own immense relief, was attacked by such severe rheumatism that he was sent to the hospital. He was visited there by another officer, Warnick. The U-65 was due to sail next day, and Warnick felt that it would be her last voyage, and his. He brought his messmate most of his personal belongings to be sent on to his wife when the news everybody expected came. It broke on 31 July. U-65 was posted as missing. Her end was as mysterious as everything else that had happened to her. On 10 July, an American submarine off of Cape Clear on the west coast of Ireland sighted a U-boat. Through the periscope, her number could be made out. It was U-65. Hasty orders were given for attack. But just before the American torpedoes were fired, something happened that made it unnecessary. With fearful detonation, U-65 blew up. The reason was never known. Possibly one of her own torpedoes exploded in its tube, or another U-boat attacked her by mistake and made off without being sighted by the Americans. But there were no remains on which to hold an inquest. The mystery of U-65, surely one of the strangest in naval history, was investigated thoroughly after the war by a psychologist, Professor Hecht, who published a pamphlet on the subject. In 1932, Hector C. Bywater, the English naval historian, followed this up with an investigation of his own, carefully checking all the evidence and testimonies. Neither Professor Hecht nor he was able to draw any firm conclusions. As a scientist, Dr. Hecht did not care for the supernatural explanation, but he could not suggest a watertight rational one. Today, so far away in time from the events, it would be even more difficult to do so. The ghost stories are convincing and well attested, and there are many who have continued to believe that she was haunted. On the other hand, several who had sailed in U-65 felt that there was malicious human agency behind the accidents. Were they the work of a British secret agent? It is hard to see how some of them were contrived, and others, like the washing overboard of the gunner and the beheading of the captain, were obvious coincidences. But the whole thing has a very strong smell of sabotage. Another possibility is that the ghosts and various disasters were the work of some Ellen Spiegel with a grudge or a taste for killing. If the last accident of all was a planned one, the saboteur must have blown himself up with his victims. He might have saved himself the trouble, for within 4 months the war was over, and 138 U-boats were meekly brought as captives into Harwich. So, we have more stories to read, but we have just over 6 minutes and counting. So we can start this story, and then next month, when we have story time again, I shall restart it, and we will convene where we left off. And these stories seem to be the longest, but this is the last story in this chapter, and then we'll be going to They Came Back. So this one is called Phantom Sailors and Ships. Sorry, I need to take a drink. Oh my goodness. I can't wait till this crud goes away. Alright. So, the sailor has always been the most superstitious of men. Isolated by great trenches of ocean for months at a time from his fellow men ashore, he remains more unsophisticated than the soldier, even in these days of vastly improved communications. And far more than the soldier or the landsman, he is a prey to the sky-eye influences of legend and hearsay. In the days before the blessing of electric light, he lived through his night watches in a world of illusory shadows and flickering lanterns. His eyes misled by sea mist and moon ray. Anything can happen at sea, however fearful or miraculous. Jack might be terrified, but he was never wholly surprised by Phantom Hulk, long-dead pirate, monster, mermaid, or, possibly most horrible of all, the apparition of a drowned messmate in his hammock. Whatever fears he suffered would all be repaid by the breathless interest of shore audiences when he spun his yarns in the Portsmouth Tavern, perhaps adding a few colorful details which might earn him an extra pot of porter or pipeful of baccy from some sensation-hungry landlubber. But even allowing for superstition and imagination, there are countless stories of strange appearances at sea which have been seen by whole crews at a time and by different ships on different occasions. Phantom sailors and the ghosts of their vessels seem to outlive land wraiths. Remaining as active in days of steam as in those of sail, the theory has been advanced, and the gradual fading of familiar specters ashore is due to glare of electricity in which the frail shadows cannot survive. On the dark surface of the sea, conditions are most favorable. This may explain the apparently endless voyage of the most famous of all sea specters, the Flying Dutchman. For more than 300 years, Cornelius Vanderdecken has been afloat, even since that day on the 17th century when he set sail for Holland from Batavia. Captain Vanderdecken had the reputation of being as merciless to his ship as he was to his men, pushing her on through storms and turbulent seas that would have deterred a more reasonable skipper. He had also a name for godlessness and blasphemy. On this particular fateful voyage, his ship ran into violent headwinds when she reached the Cape of Good Hope. For 9 weeks, Vanderdecken and his weary crew urged her on, but in vain. So I'm going to leave... excuse me. I'm going to leave the story off there. And like I said, next month when you have story time with me, TessaTNT, we will pick up where we left off. And this book again is known as 50 Strange Stories of the Supernatural, true accounts of weird and otherworldly happenings. And these are true stories given by actual people, and it has been put together and edited by Mr. John Canning. So I hope you guys have enjoyed story time this evening, and I'm just really grateful that we got through the anniversary of 9/11 without a hitch. So thank you again so much, you guys, for joining me this evening on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. It was a pleasure to read to you. And thank you to all of our friends on We Are Paradox Media's Facebook, Spreaker, Twitter, Periscope, iHeartRadio, and wherever else beyond the Omniverse you may be listening tonight. I had a wonderful time, and I can't wait to do it again next weekend when we have Psychic Saturday with psychic medium Jim Hunt. He's been on a lot of shows, and he's pretty well known. And then on Sunday, our show is known as Aliens, UFOs, and Hypnotic Regression with Miss Leslie Mitchell-Clark. You guys don't forget, we are all in this together. Together, we can make the world a little better. And together, my friends, we are Paradox Media, because without you, there is no us. I would like to thank our musical host, Mr. Roy Washington, for giving us all of this music that we get to listen to on our breaks instead of those damned commercials. I'd also like to thank our sponsors. We have Mr. Jim Morrison of the Scotland Isles. We also have Mr. Dale Elson, Miss Mia Savage, and Mr. Kevin McDougall. If you guys would like to join us on the Skype after party, look me up, Tessa.N.Thomas30, or give us a jingle, 970-335-9596. Until next time, nighty-night, love and light. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and please don't work too hard this coming week. Take care of my youths.